Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Aizawa Saved Deku on the Rooftop. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Shyuda sat at his desk reading over the reports that his students had turned in that morning, his red pin flying across the pages as he made corrections. Some papers were more notably marked than others, mainly Kaminari's and Ishido's. Kirishima had made huge improvements under the tutelage of Bakugu. Shyuda sometimes wonders how some of them even passed the entrance exams. How the hell had Kaminari misspelled his name as Calamari? That's not even how you spell that. Maybe he did it on purpose? Shyuda prayed he did it on purpose. It was a sad day when Shyuda was praying for his students to be idiots on purpose. He was almost halfway through the papers when an alarm in his room sounded, not loud enough to wake Eri, sleeping one room over. The top floor of the dorms had been made into an apartment of sorts, for the teachers to reside in while overseeing the students. The room Eri was in had once been his office, but had been quickly converted into a bedroom when it was decided that he was going to be her guardian. Eraserhead, the high-pitched voice of one of the many security robots that traversed the school, called over the speaker in his room. Student on the roof of the dorm. It's past curfew. Deal with it. The alarm ended, thankfully, once the robot made its announcement. Sighing and rubbing the back of his neck in agitation, Shyuda reached for his phone to check the time. Clicking his phone on, the time revealed it to be 2 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, he wasn't the only one who should have been asleep in bed. Grabbing his capture weapon from the hook on his door, he quickly left his apartment and made his way to the roof. I swear if I find Tokoyami and Dark Shadow screaming into the void, I will throw them into the void. Shyuda thought to himself as he pushed open the rooftop door. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the darkness outside, and when they did he felt his blood run cold with fear. Sitting on the edge of the roof looking down was none other than his #1 problem child, Midoria Izuku. What alarmed him even more was the soft sniffles and whimpering sounds coming from the boy. Shyuda's thoughts were racing a mile a minute. Don't freak, this kid cries all the time. It's nothing new. Shyuda tried to reason. The more grim part of his mind challenged that. Why would he be sitting on the ledge of the roof then? It's not very safe. And he's crying on the ledge of the roof. Shyuda didn't want to assume suicide, but to Shyuda's rational mind, that's what it looked like. Why would one of the happiest kids I know consider suicide? The kid has a smile that could light up a room. Logically, he knew that some of the most depressed people out there could smile like nothing was wrong. And being depressed doesn't mean you can't be happy. Shyuda just wondered what could have pushed the kid to this point. Not waiting another moment, Shyuda threw out his capture weapon, wrapping it tightly around the boy before yanking it. Midoria let out a startled yelp as he was roughly launched away from the roof's edge and into Shyuda's arms as he dashed forward to catch his student. Startled, Midoria thrashed around while trying to activate his quirk in order to escape. The many villain attacks had left the students with fight first ask questions later response. When Midoriya's quirk didn't activate, his struggles slowed until they finally stopped, realization as to who possibly had him finally settling in. He quickly glanced up into the determined face of his homeroom teacher, relaxing as he realized that it was, indeed, his teacher who held him and not a villain. Tears long forgotten, the boy asked, "Mr. Aizawa? What are you doing? Why are you here? Not that you need a reason to be here, you live here too. But what? Why grab me with the capture weapon?" Shyuda slowly unwound his weapon from around the child and settled it back over his shoulders, taking a moment to calm his nerves before he spoke. He turned Midoriya around to face him, and taking a deep breath while keeping a firm hand rested on the boy's shoulder, he spoke. "I'll ask the questions here, Midoriya." Shyuda activated his quirk, his hair lifting to float above him as indication that he wasn't in the mood for any bullshit, and dropping it when he was satisfied with Midoriya's reaction. Midoriya nodded his head in acknowledgement, at breakneck speeds, clearly frightened by his teacher. Shyuda opened his mouth to begin quizzing the boy but quickly snapped his mouth shut. This was not where he wanted to have this conversation, the roof's edge looming ominously in the background. Grabbing Midoriya by the wrist, he pulled him back into the dorm. "Come with me," he growled, dragging the problem child by the wrist back to his apartment. The boy stumbled a few times, trying to keep up with Shyuda's long strides. Once inside his home, he ushered the boy into the living room and onto the worn black leather couch that he has owned since he lived in his first apartment right after graduating UA. He sat himself on the coffee table in front of Midoriya and stared at him. Midoriya sat stiffly on the couch, clearly nervous and unsure how to act in front of the strict teacher. "Mr. Aizawa, what?" Midoriya began, but was cut off when Shyuda held his hand up to silence the teenager. Shyuda was leaned forward with his elbow on his knee and his hand covering his eyes. They sat in silence for a few minutes while Shyuda gathered his thoughts. What could have possibly happened to push the school cinnamon roll this far? He is surrounded by friends that adore him. He has good grades. The teachers adore him. All Might adores him. Is it something at home? He's an only child being raised by a single mother, and from what All Might said, she loves him to the moon and back. So why? Realizing that the only way he will get any answers to his questions is by asking the boy, he sighs and resigns himself to this uncomfortable but necessary conversation. Shyuda slowly sits up and looks at the boy in front of him, who was beginning to turn blue. "Breath, Midoriya," Shyuda commands, rolling his eyes as Midoriya gasps, taking in deep breaths. Poor kid was just a bundle of nerves. "You're not in trouble, kid, so stop panicking." "Okay." Shyuda waits as the teen nods slowly, doing his best to compose himself. The tears on his face have long since dried, but his eyes are still red-rimmed. "Now can you tell me why you were going to jump off the roof?" That was clearly the wrong thing to say, as the boy jumps to his feet trembling and stuttering. Wasn't going to jump. I would and never." Shyuda jumps to his feet too, roughly placing his hand over Midoriya's mouth. They stand like that, Midoriya frozen from shock with Shyuda's hand over his mouth, and Shyuda listening for any sign that Eri had woken up. Once he's sure that the little girl is still asleep, he removes his hand and pushes Midoriya back onto the couch. "Please keep your voice down, Eri is asleep." Midoriya takes a deep breath and nods his head. "If you weren't planning on jumping, then just what were you doing? Because from my perspective, it seemed like you were strongly considering it." Shyuda hesitantly reached forward and pats Midoriya on the knee. "I promise I won't be mad at you if that's what you were planning, I only want to help." Midoriya takes in a shuddering breath. Soft sobs rack the boy's body as he tries to keep himself from being too loud. It takes a few minutes for Midoriya to regain most of his control. The tears and sobs finally subsiding, he still trembles and his voice wavers. I just like to be outside when I'm upset. Looking at the stars calms me down. The best place to see them is from the roof. I must have lost track of the tea time. I wasn't going to jump, I swear. I could never do that to my mom. It would break her heart." He won't jump because it would break his mom's heart? Is that the only thing stopping him? Or is it the main thing? I just haven't had a breakdown that bad in a while. Midoriya continues. "I thought looking at the stars would help. I don't even remember going over to the edge, honestly." He doesn't remember going to the edge? That's not good? Isn't that like dissociation? Boo, but I wouldn't have jumped. I've never considered jumping, even when I was told to. Shyuda interrupts Midoriya's mumbling, grabbing both his shoulders, squeezing tightly and looking deeply into his eyes. "The F, did he just say? He was told to. To what?" "Midoriya," Shyuda begins, an edge to his voice. "Did you just say someone told to commit suicide?" The teen freezes, realizing his slip-up. He looks down, away from Shyuda and closes his mouth tightly, determined to remain silent. Realizing he won't get Midoriya to say anything about that right now, Shyuda changes topics. All right. Can you at least tell me what upset you tonight? You were fine earlier today. What happened?" Midoriya relaxes at the change of topic. It's not much, but it's something. Shyuda removes his hands from around the boy's shoulders. He makes a last-second decision and ruffles the boy's green curly hair, before scooting back on the coffee table out of the boy's personal space. He's still close, but the kid has more breathing room again, although their knees keep bumping into each other. After taking a few deep breaths, Midoriya answers him. Today is my parents' anniversary. My dad works overseas, and we might hear from him once a year. My mom bears with it because she loves my dad. Unconditionally, but it's hard for her. Shyuda hears a hint of resentment in Midoriya's voice, but he's not sure if it's directed towards his mother or his father. Maybe both? It's especially hard for her on anniversaries and birthdays. This is the first year that she's had to face it alone. I've always been there for her, to help make it easier. She needs me to be there for her, and I can't. Not will all the villain attacks. Midoriya takes a deep breath, wringing his hands together. He still hasn't looked up at Shyuda. Probably thinks I'll look at him with pity. Shyuda wouldn't. He's not the type to let his emotions, other than anger or boredom, show on his face. He also doesn't show pity when it's not wanted or needed. Sure, having an absent parent, Esikis, Shuda's own parents were hardly around, and when they were assholes. But Midoriya Inko was obviously more than capable of raising her son on her own. She had been for many years. There was no reason to pity the boy, not in Shuda's mind at least. Midoriya sighed and rubbed at his arms. I just hate that he never calls her. It's like she doesn't exist to him, until he happens to remember her. I don't exist at all. Shyuda winces. Not being acknowledged by his father probably hurt the boy a lot. Shyuda can sympathize a little. At one point when he was small, he had wanted his father's attention too. And I just hate that I'm not able to be with her like she's used to. It's hard for her. Cue internal confused Scooby-Doo sound. Hard for her. But not you? Well, that's probably normal. Teenagers don't want to spend every waking moment around their parents. They want to be independent and live their own lives. Maybe if I had been useful when I was a kid, he would have felt the need to be more involved, and could be with her more. Kids shouldn't have to do anything to earn their parents' love. Midoriya lets out a small whine, head hanging lower than before. I could tell that she had been crying a lot, and I wasn't there for her. Shyuda had been listening, and he wasn't pleased, if the pinched lines between his eyebrows was any indication. So far all I've heard is how he's sad because his mom is sad, because she misses her husband. What about you? What about how it makes you feel? You have feelings too. It shouldn't be all about her. Shyuda thinks to himself. Leaning forward, he places his index finger under Midoriya's chin and tilts his head up to meet his own gaze. Midoriya's eyes widen at the use of his given name. Shyuda doesn't usually call his students by their given names, but given how honest the kid was being with him, he decided to forego formalities. It's SCKS that your mom is sad, but she's an adult and can deal with her own emotions and take care of herself. You are the child, and it's not your responsibility to take care of her emotionally. So far all I've heard is how your father's absence affects her, but what about you? What do you feel? Removing his hand from Midozuku's face, Shyuda leans back to watch the emotions flicker across the boy's face. Kids sure can move through emotions fast. It doesn't matter, Izuku says. The glare Shyuda shoots him has Izuku backtracking fast. I mean, I was only a couple years old when he left, Izuku begins. So I don't remember him. I'm mad that he's never come home to us, but I can't say that I miss him. You can't miss what you've never had. So I'm just mad for my mom's sake, even if she isn't mad because she loves him. But it is my responsibility to look after my mom because he isn't here. I'm all she has, and that makes me the man of the house. So it is my job. Izuku whispers the last part angrily. Sighing, Shyuda rubs the back of his neck. Izuku had a point, he wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right. I want you to listen to me, Izuku, really listen. It's good that you feel that you have to look after your mom, there is nothing wrong with that. You are very responsible and mature. But you are only 15 years old. There is only so much you can do, only so much you should do. You have to let your mom deal with the absence of her husband on her own. She is the one supposed to be helping you deal with your father's absence. You are putting yourself through too much stress worrying about things you have no control over. You said it, you don't even remember going to the edge of the roof. What if that was your subconscious rebelling from the stress and looking for a way to end it? Both Shyuda and Izuku shuddered at the thought. I don't know, kid. I'm not a psychologist. All I know is you are a teenager. You are going to a prestigious school that pushes you to your limit. You are training to be a hero, to survive. You have faced more villains than most third years. Had to learn how to control a self-destructive quirk, and deal with all the normal drama that comes with being a teenager. You have a habit of getting involved with other people's problems. That's a good quality for a hero, but you are not a hero yet. You are adding unnecessary stress on top of all your other stresses. Stop it, and just focus on yourself. Don't you ever stop and think about yourself? Shyuda screeched internally. Shyuda knows he's fixing to hit below the belt, but the safety and well-being of his student comes first. Your mom can take care of herself, that's what being an adult is about. She's fine on her own. You are not an adult, and are not responsible for her. You won't always live with her, like right now. You can't live your life fretting over everything that makes her sad. You'll drive yourself insane. Izuku tried to interrupt him. But you don't understand dash. Shyuda cut him off. Then help me too. Help me to understand why you think you have to take care of your mom. Isn't she a capable adult? Yes. Then I don't see why you have to play grown-up. Izuku rubbed his face in frustration. I'm not. I just can't let her fret or get too sad. But people get sad, that's life. It's not like she's sad all the time. Besides, parents look after the children, not the other way around. You're gonna kill yourself from stress, and then your mom really will be alone. Does she even know how much this bothers you? How could she? I didn't even know he was upset. He smiles through everything. Smiles. Through everything. Does she know anything about what you feel, or do you just smile her worries away? By this point Izuku had curled in on himself. His sobs were shaking his body and he was close to hyperventilating. Shyuda felt like he was missing something important. He was positive that Izuku wasn't telling him everything. But Shyuda would figure it out. He wasn't going to let Izuku wiggle his way out of the truth. Whatever it was. All might is a bad influence. You can't just smile everything away. Shyuda moved over to the couch and pulled the boy into his arms, rubbing soothing circles across the boy's back like Hisashi had always done for him. Shyuda wasn't really sure how to comfort someone, but he could at least try. Shyuda and Izuku sat on the couch together for a long time. Izuku was practically glued to Shyuda's side. Shyuda just kept holding him, whispering soothing words every now and then. At least he hoped they were soothing. It was obvious that the boy was exhausted from all of his crying. His eyelids were drooping and shoulders were slumping. Shyuda needed to say one last thing before he let the boy sleep. He knows he had been blunt with Izuku, even a bit harsh, but the world could be a cruel place and it was his job to get the boy ready for it. So Shyuda wasn't going to spare him. Already the boy had faced so much during his time at UA, and apparently had some secret demons. Pushing the boy to spill all his dark secrets too soon or too fast might be more damaging than helpful, but Shyuda would get him to spill them eventually. So Shyuda pulled the boy tight against his chest and rested his chin on Izuku's head. Izuku! He mumbled into the boy's hair. It took a moment before the boy replied. Yeah. His voice was raspy from crying. Shyuda sighed before dropping one last bomb. Our conversation is over for now. We still have a lot to talk about. Not all at once, but I'm not letting go of the fact that someone told you to kill yourself. Shyuda felt Izuku stiffen in his arms and hugged the boy tighter. But I won't rush you. I want you to feel ready to tell me. To trust me enough to tell me. We will have to talk to your mom about how your father's absence is affecting you through her. And about being pressured to kill yourself. Izuku thought for a moment, which was hard because he was very tired, before he answered. But what if I never feel ready to talk about those things and the others? The others? As in there is more than just being told to commit suicide. Shyuda had to bite his tongue to keep from growling. Too bad, he responded. He was feeling too stressed and emotional to respond nicely at this point. Thankfully Izuku didn't argue, just snuggled closer to Shyuda and closed his eyes. There's a lot you don't know about Mr. Aizawa. Izuku murmured. Shyuda quirked an eyebrow, even though the kid couldn't see it. You gonna tell me? He asked. Izuku yawned, and waited a minute before answering. I don't know. Shyuda sighed and patted the greenette's back. Just consider it then. Izuku nodded his head against Shyuda's chest. Eventually Izuku's breathing evened out, and was soon deeply asleep. Hefting Izuku into his arms bridal style and standing up from the couch, Shyuda slowly made his way to his bedroom. Holy crap! What does this kid eat, bricks? Izuku was not as light as he looked. Shyuda quickly deposited Izuku onto his bed, standing and leaning back enough to crack his back. I'm getting too old for this. After tucking the boy into the bed, Shyuda grabbed a throw blanket that was folded at the end of his bed and made his way to the couch. Wrapping the blanket around his shoulders, he quickly face-planted onto the couch. His last thought before falling asleep was, problem child. Shyuda couldn't remember the last time he had slept so hard. He remembers collapsing onto the couch, but anything after that was lost to him. Being a light sleeper, he can usually count the number of times he rolls over at night, but not last night. That must be a testament to how stressed the whole situation with Midoria had left him. Honestly, just thinking about the problem child was reviving the stress from last night, and Shyuda would give anything to fall back asleep for a few more hours. There was just one problem, and that problem was the insistent poking of his face. Shyuda knew that poking. He has been living with that poking every morning for almost 2.5 months now. That poking was from a very little finger, from a very little girl. A very little girl named Eri. Shyuda let out a long deep groan and buried his face deeper into the couch, something that would normally cause Eri to giggle and poke Shyuda harder. She could be very insistent. This time his morning antics were met with silence. Turning his head in Eri's direction, Shyuda cracked open one eyelid and looked into the concerned face of his foster daughter. Seeing her worried expression, Shyuda pushed himself up and into a sitting position, stretching his arms over his head and causing multiple joints to pop and make very audible cracking sounds. I'm only 30. Am I supposed to make this much noise from moving? Shyuda thought to himself. Eri had climbed up beside him at some point during his morning stretch, and was sitting quietly. Not uncommon, she could be a very quiet girl at times. Years of fear and conditioning had made her that way, but normally she would be dragging poor Shyuda into the kitchen by now, demanding food. She was an early riser, and while she wasn't an overly cheerful morning person like an excessively loud, man-child cockatoo that he knew, she did demand her breakfast bright and early. Routine was important to victims of trauma, and having a sudden guest sleeping in Shyuda's bed was probably throwing a wrench into that routine. She probably would be more upset if the guest wasn't Izuku, Deku. She has been glued to the boy since her rescue, and definitely saw him as an older brother. Shyuda knew that her silence meant that she was waiting for an explanation from him. Sighing, Shyuda stood and picked Eri up, carrying her into the kitchen and depositing her onto one of the 4 chairs that were placed around a small round table. We'll talk while I start breakfast, Shyuda offered, walking over to the refrigerator to get the ingredients he needed to make omuris. While he worked he began talking. Izuku is dash. Shyuda stopped. How was he supposed to explain this in a safe, non-triggering way for Eri to understand? Izuku wasn't necessarily suicidal, he hoped, but he was clearly depressed. How do you tell a child who has suffered so much that one of her heroes was probably only alive so as not to inconvenience or hurt his mother? Shyuda was still trying to wrap his head around that. Deku is? The little girl prompted, unaware of her guardian's internal struggle. Shyuda sighed and decided to take the most simple route of explanation. Izuku is really sad, I think, and he's been hiding it behind his smiles. So he won't worry anyone, Shyuda said as he cracked eggs into the frying pan on the stove. Shyuda waited, letting what he said to Eri sink in. She sat in silence for a few minutes while he finished their breakfast. The rice had already finished cooking in the rice cooker just as he was finishing the 3 omelets. Shyuda had a very large frying pan for cooking in. Hisashi tended to come eat over with them and had insisted that Shyuda needed the large pan. He placed 2 filled plates down on the table, one in front of Eri and one in front of his seat. A 3rd plate was placed in the microwave for Izuku for when he woke up. Eri took a few bites of her omuris before asking Shyuda, "Why is Deku sad?" Shyuda swallowed the mouthful of his food and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, from what he told me last night, he's sad because his mom is sad." Seeing Eri about to ask another question, Probably about why his mom was sad. Shyuda held up his hand to pause her question. They would get through this faster without having to stop for her to ask why after every question. Izuku said that his dad doesn't live with them anymore, and that makes his mom sad. Now Izuku isn't living with her anymore either, and it's making her even more sad. They have always been close, and I think her anxiety is affecting Izuku. By the way, anxiety triggers anxiety. It's a beach. Izuku thinks he has to fix it by taking care of her, but this isn't something that he can fix. It's something she has to come to terms with on her own. Do you understand so far? Shyuda inquired. Eri nodded her head and asked, why doesn't Deku's dad live with them? Shyuda took a few more bites of his food before he replied. Don't know. Izuku said his dad works far away, but doesn't visit or call. His loss. But Izuku needs to learn that he can't fix everything, and grown-ups are allowed to feel sad sometimes and have to deal with their problems themselves. Although, I don't think he's telling me everything. His Aizawa senses are tingling. Not that he would ever admit that. Eri nodded her head. Grown-up problems are hard. Kids should be kids. That's what Mirio says. Bless Mirio and his words of wisdom. I'm using that as an argument against Problem Child as soon as he wakes up. Shyuda nodded his head in agreement. Izuku also mentioned that someone told him something very mean and hurtful, something no one deserves to be told. Now I'm worried if that was the only thing said to him, because it clearly affected him. Now I'm worried about his safety. More than I already am. Shyuda thinks bitterly, shoveling more food into his mouth. Eri sets her fork down sharply and looks at Shyuda with wide eyes. Her bottom lip trembles and her eyes get glassy, but she doesn't cry. She only cries when extremely distressed. Is Deku in danger? She whimpers. Shyuda reaches across the table and runs his hand soothingly through her long silver hair a couple of times before retreating back across the table. He's never been great at comforting people, but no one can say he doesn't try, especially for her. I won't let anyone hurt Izuku, I promise. Shyuda makes his voice as reassuring as possible, and Eri visibly relaxes. She trusts Shyuda to take care of things. I have a pretty good idea on who the threat is, but I can't jump to conclusions. I need Izuku to tell me himself who told him to kill himself, along with whatever else the boy is hiding. But if I'm correct, then Izuku has been hurt by his bully while at UA. If I'm right, and I usually am, I will definitely put the fear into Bakugu Katsuki. Shyuda thinks, clenching his fists under the table. Shyuda does not tolerate bullying and will not let this go unchecked. Eri has finished with her breakfast and looks at Shyuda with determination blazing in her eyes. Deku needs to talk to his mom. Shyuda nods his head, agreeing with her. And you need to protect him from the person who hurt him. Shyuda hums in acknowledgement. She wasn't wrong, and Shyuda planned to do just that. He needs to move in with us. Eri states, like it's the most logical answer there is. Poor Shyuda had just taken a sip of his drink when Eri announced the last part, so he understandably spit his drink across the room. Eri looks at him like he had just grown a second head, like she can't fathom why he would react this way. Coughing, he stands up and grabs the dish towel off of the counter and drops it on his impromptu spit take, mopping it up while trying not to cough a lung up. Once his airway is clear and the mess cleaned up, he turns to Eri. How did you come to that conclusion? He asks, voice raspy from coughing. Eri crosses her arms and gives Shyuda a look that questions his intelligence. Like she couldn't fathom how he hadn't thought of it himself. Well, she begins, listing off on her fingers. You said Deku's dad isn't around. Someone is being mean to him. And he needs to learn how to just be a kid sometimes. Shyuda nods, following along so far. Deku needs a dad to take care of him and teach him. You're doing that for me, so you can do it for him too. Shyuda's stunned. And his heart did not do a little flip and flutter at Eri calling him a dad, her dad. No, it absolutely did not. Eri, Shyuda begins, voice cracking. Curse emotions. Get back under the layers of sarcasm, attitude, indifference and weariness that I buried you under. I can't just take Izuku and claim him as my kid. I mean I can, it just might not be legal. He has a family, even if they are broken. He also lives right below us. Shyuda adds. There is no reason to move him. I can protect and teach him just fine under our current living arrangements. I'm not going to be this kid's dad. I did not sign up for that. Although, depending on who the kid outs as his bully, those living arrangements might change. Eri hops down from her chair and glares at Shyuda. She isn't even as tall as his hip, but her glare has him shutting his mouth in an instant. She means business. She marches her small self around the table and puts her hands on her hips, raising her chin in defiance. She spends too much time with Nemuri. Izuku lives with us or I go live with him. She states, stomping her foot. It's unreasonable, illogical, and such a childlike argument. Shyuda stares, because there is no way his quiet little girl who is only just learning some self-confidence is throwing a tantrum. A tantrum for Izuku. So he stares and she glares back. This is too much. He knew how much Eri loved Izuku, but to think she would get this protective over him. To say he was shocked would be an understatement. Standing up against him for the sake of Turkey. He knows he won't win this argument, at least not right now. Shyuda lowers his head to the table with a loud thump, causing the small girl to jump, startled. We can talk about me kidnapping Izuku after I have talked to him and gathered all the information I need. Deal? He asks, holding out his hand towards Eri. After some hesitation, she nods, grabbing his hand and giving it a firm shake. The determination is still in her eyes. Good. Now go wake up Sleeping Beauty. Shyuda grumbles. Eri nods enthusiastically and rushes out of the kitchen. No doubt to poke Izuku awake like she does Shyuda each morning. Cleaning away their dishes from the table, Shyuda carries them over to the sink to begin washing and drying them. Shyuda smiles to himself. Eri is very clearly planning on being difficult about this whole situation, but he can't find it in himself to be anything but pleased at how determined she is. He's obviously wrapped around her finger already. It makes his heart swell with how the broken little girl can still find it in herself to love others. And she clearly loves Izuku. A few minutes later, Izuku stumbles into the kitchen with Eri clutching his hand. Shyuda didn't think it was possible for the boy to look worse than he did last night, but clearly he was wrong. There are tired lines under his eyes that are slightly bloodshot from crying. He looks haggard and not very awake. Shyuda gives him credit for being able to function this early. Shyuda was already downing the coffee that his coffee maker had brewed. It has a timer. Shyuda's usually too lazy to make the effort in the morning to go about the process of cooking breakfast and make coffee. The coffee burns his throat as he takes a large swallow, finishing the coffee in record time. If there was a "how fast can you drink hot coffee" sport, Shyuda would be a pro. As Eri pulls him over to the table and ushers him to sit down, Shyuda grabs the plate out of the microwave, still hot, and puts it in front of Izuku. Izuku eats slowly, clearly in no mood for food this early, but unwilling to worry Eri any more than she already clearly is. She sits next to him, silently watching him. Shyuda takes the moment of Izuku being distracted by food to observe him. Distracted is an understatement. The kid is barely responsive. But it is pretty early. His hair is a mess, pajamas rumpled and face pale. The kid obviously had a rough night, and Shyuda wants to kick himself for having slept through it. Shyuda pushes himself off of the counter that he had been leaned against and makes his way to his bedroom. Eri looks up at him, but stays seated beside Izuku. She's clearly curious as to what Shyuda is doing, but is unwilling to leave Izuku's side. Izuku is less likely to try and make a break for it with Eri hanging onto him. Shout goes into his room and shuts the door behind him. He walks over to his desk and grabs his phone from where he had left it charging before all the trouble began. Unlocking it, he quickly calls the principal. After a few rings, Nedu picks up. "Mr. Aizawa?" The mouse bear dog thing answers. "What a pleasant surprise. May I ask why you are calling so early in the morning? It is very unlike you." Shyuda sits down at his desk and leans back in his chair. "I'm taking the day off. Along with Midoria Izuku. Some worrying things have been brought to my attention. So I'm taking the day to get to the bottom of them." Shyuda replies, rubbing his neck in frustration. "I need to stop that before I rub my neck raw." Nedu is silent for a few moments before he speaks. How serious are we talking, Eraserhead? Some, easily handled. Others, very serious and not easily fixed. I'll inform you more once I have more details. I would appreciate it if you would inform All Might that Izuku is with me and that I would like him to keep his distance while I get to the bottom of things. His presence could just make things worse. The kid hates to disappoint or bother him. Also, could you ask Mike to come get Eri and take her to her tutor? Shyuda asked. Nedu hummed while he thought over what Shyuda had said. Very well. I expect to be informed the moment you have all the information you need. I will inform the other teachers of Izuku's absence so they can reassure his classmates and make sure they don't meddle. Call it sick leave. And with that, the principal hung up the phone. This is the first time that I will have ever been absent from my teaching duties. Shyuda thought, sighing. It had to be the problem child. After checking the time, 5:46 a.m., Shyuda made his way back into the kitchen. No point in changing out of his sleepwear, black sweatpants and gray t-shirt, when he was just going to be sitting around the apartment all day, possibly being cried on. Izuku was still at the table, but was crying softly, his food forgotten. Eri was patting his back, telling him softly that everything would be okay. She was going to be his hero this time. Be still, my beating heart. That just caused the waterworks to increase, and Izuku pulled Eri onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was his lifeline. Shyuda just stood by and watched, unwilling to interrupt their moment. After a few minutes, Izuku's crying began to slowly subside, and Shyuda made his presence known by clearing his throat. Izuku stiffened and released his hold on Eri. She peered around Izuku's shoulder to look at Shyuda. Shyuda jerked his thumb in the direction of Eri's room. Go get dressed, Mike will be here shortly to take you to your lessons. Because she woke up so early, she had early lessons. He could see where Eri wanted to argue, so Shyuda activated his quirk and stared down the little girl. No arguing. I still have things to talk to Izuku about, remember? Remembering the deal she had made with Shyuda about talking to Izuku about staying with them, something Shyuda had not agreed to. Not that it mattered to Eri. She got up from Izuku's lap and dashed to her bedroom to get dressed for the day. Shyuda deactivated his quirk once she was out of his sight and walked over to Izuku and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. How about sitting in the living room while I clean up the kitchen? Shyuda asked. Izuku just nodded, and shakily made his way to the living room. Shyuda made quick work of cleaning Izuku's half-finished plate, and sat down at the table again, opting to give the boy some space for the moment. A rhythmic knocking at the door drew his attention and he quickly called out for them to come in. Mike for once didn't enter with his trademark enthusiasm and loud, yeah, shouted in English. He meekly walked over to Shyuda, his brother in every way but blood. So, how's the little listener? Hisashi whispered, patting Shyuda on the shoulder. He could see Izuku in the living room. Nedu had filled him in on Izuku dealing with some problems, so Hisashi was a little worried. He always worries about his students, but when it comes to Midoria, things tend to be a little extreme. Shyuda leaned into the hand on his shoulder for a moment before brushing Hisashi's hand away and rubbed hands over his face. Kid is probably in shock this morning. He had a rough night. Eri was able to get a reaction out of him, although it was just him crying. How can someone cry so much? Shyuda wasn't a crier, but that had a lot to do with his personality and the fact that he had dry eye. Hisashi snorted at the last part, but sobered up quickly. What happened? That dude is all sunshine and rainbows or self-sacrificing fierce determination. What's going on that you felt you had to get involved and take a day off? You never take days off. You came to school like a broken mummy, so what the hell is going on? Shyuda glanced into the living room. Eri was dressed for the day and sitting with Izuku watching the morning news. Shyuda doubted that Izuku had cut the TV on, so Eri must have done it to give Izuku something normal to focus on and help him relax. He was immensely proud of how observant and intelligent she was. Deciding that it was safe to speak freely, he motioned for Hisashi to come closer. Hisashi obliged, bending over so that his face was close to Shyuda's. Zashi, the kid has been letting the fact that his mom is sad over his father's absence eat him up. His dad hasn't been around for years, But she must still be having a hard time. Can't really blame her. All Might says she's as sensitive as the kid. Being a single mother must be hard too. Brat has been probably trying too hard to make things easier for her. I found him sitting on the edge of the roof crying. I thought he was going to jump. He doesn't even remember going over there because he was so distraught and stressed over being separated from her on her anniversary. To make matters worse, he apparently has been told before to jump off a roof. Hizashi gasped and clenched his fists at his sides, glancing into the living room at Izuku, before refocusing on Shyuda. And the only reason he could give for never going that far is because he couldn't do that to his mother. Shyuda took in a deep breath and continued. I'm seriously worried about what this boy has been holding in, what he's been through. He mentioned there was more than just suicide baiting. I'm almost afraid to find out what else problem child has been hiding. Hizashi essayed in a sharp breath and looked into the living room, eyes zeroing in on Izuku again. Protectiveness radiating off of him. Who could dare hurt the little green bean? Hell, Midoria had been on patrol with him a month ago and Hizashi shits you not, a villain stopped his fight because his couldn't hit an angel, because it was blasphemy and he didn't want to go to hell. So who the F told him to jump off the roof, and where can Hizashi find them? Hizashi nodded his head and whispered back. He doesn't leave this apartment until you get all the answers you need. Call in Tsukachi if you need undeniable proof that you are getting all the right info. Don't let Midoriya hold anything back. Shyuda nodded in agreement. That was a rational course of action, but he would only use it as a last resort if he felt Izuku was keeping anything from him. He doubted the boy had it in him to be anything but truthful at the moment. Too stressed to fight Shyuda's inquiries. Shyuda stood and walked into the living room, Hizashi staying behind in the kitchen. He probably didn't want to stress Izuku out any more than he already was. Eri, Mix here to take you to tutoring. Get going. Blunt and to the point Aizawa. That's what he'll be known for. That and being kick butt. Eri nodded, hugging Izuku's arm before she got up and left with Hizashi. Shyuda made his way over to Izuku and sat on the coffee table again, just as he had done last night. Grabbing the remote, he shut off the TV and focused his attention on the boy in front of him. Izuku was already crying again. If this kid doesn't die from villains or from stress, he's definitely going to die from dehydration from crying, Shyuda thought wryly. Here's how this is going to go. I want to know everything. Everything that has been bothering you, every negative thing that has happened, been done or said to you. Everything. And you will answer all of my questions, and you will hold nothing back. If I for 1 second think you are withholding something, I will not hesitate in calling Detective Tsukachi and have him grill you. Izuku was a sobbing mess by the end of Shyuda's speech. Tears pouring down his face, hiccuping and trying to catch his breath to no avail. Shyuda waited. He was not going to rush this, and he also needed to be able to understand the boy, and he doubted he would be able to in the state Izuku was in at the moment. So he waited. It took a while for Izuku to cry himself out, and a little while longer before Shyuda was convinced he would be able to talk properly. All right, kid. I know you don't want this, but it has to be done. As an afterthought, Shyuda added, if Eri could tell us everything that had happened to her, then you should be able to also. Izuku nodded but didn't move his gaze away from the floor. Shyuda noticed this and relented, you don't have to look at me if that helps. Izuku nodded and after taking a deep breath, he began speaking, knowing it was futile to try and fight Shyuda. He was also afraid to try. So he gathered his courage and started. He started from the beginning about how he noticed the other kids had dads and he didn't. How at first his dad called every week but eventually stopped to only once or twice a month. How he saw that his mom missed his dad, but was happy to get any calls from the man, no matter how brief. How the doctors declared him quirkless, which was why his dad had stopped calling. When he asked his mother if he could still be a hero, his mother could only cry over him and apologize. She didn't believe in him. It made him feel as if he had been told that he had a terminal illness with no cure. His mother almost acted if it was. He received no support from his mother when it came to his dream of being a hero, and that she treated him as something fragile. He could understand her need to protect him, but it still hurt, and felt a bit excessive. Excessive? How Bakugu, Kaken, his childhood friend began bullying him, naming him Deku or useless after misinterpreting the kanji in his name. He never gave up on his dream, despite his lack of support, and Bakugu actively trying to crush his dream. Bakugu saw it as Izuku thinking he was better than him, and lashed out, attacking him with not only his word, but also his quirk. Shyuda dug his nails into his palms, grounding himself so as not to go hunting down the explosive teen and having him read the entire quirk's code of conduct and laws and regulations, before beating him over the head with the very large and heavy book. He described how his teachers turned a blind eye to Izuku's torment, seeing as he was at the bottom of the pecking order or below it, not worth protecting. It's not like he would ever be anyone important. Fing discrimination. How his classmates ignored him like a pariah, out of general dislike for him or for fear of what Bakugu would do if they tried to befriend him. Others bullied him alongside Bakugu. Some worse than others. He admitted to not having a single friend since he was 5 years old, and only made friends once he entered UA. Izuku then tells how after the teacher unhelpfully mentioned his goal of attending UA one day, Bakugu and 2 of his followers had cornered him in the classroom after everyone had left. How Bakugu had singed his uniform and tried to destroy his hero analyses notebook, throwing it out the window and into a pond, telling Izuku that there was a way for him to get a quirk. Shyuda felt his stomach drop. He knows where this is going. Pray for a quirk in the next life and take a swan dive off the roof. Yep, I'm going to kill Bakugu. The hero life was nice while it lasted. Izuku then breaks Shyuda's heart even more by telling him that after leaving the school he was attacked by the sludge villain. How much bad luck can one kid have in a single day? How All Might had saved him, then told him he couldn't be a hero without a quirk and left him on a roof. Shyuda wants to kill All Might. How could he crush a child's dreams without giving him a chance to prove himself? Without knowing anything about him. Children have fragile hearts. One wrong move could push them in the wrong direction. And he left him on a roof. Sure, Shyuda expels kids left and right, but at least he gives them a chance. A chance to prove they are taking things seriously, that they can think outside the box. That they can adapt. That they might not get killed right off the bat once they graduate. All Might had dismissed the kid without a second thought or backwards glance. Izuku says it crossed his mind for a moment that jumping wouldn't be so bad. But that moment was brief, and he would rather go on living. Even if it was with a broken heart and dream. Shyuda really wants to throw up. To think he came close, if only for a moment, to losing one of his brightest and most determined students. And he would have never known. Would have never known what he was missing out on. How many of his students would have died if it wasn't for Izuku being there? That on his way home, he accidentally made his way to another villain attack, where wouldn't you know it, the sludge villain had escaped and had Bakugu as a hostage. Trying to kill him and use as a meat suit, just like he had tried to do to Izuku earlier. Shyuda knew that Izuku and Bakugu had been involved in a villain attack. He just didn't know the exact details, or much about the villain. The information wasn't mentioned in the news, and Shyuda had never thought to ask the police for the file on the villain or the attack. He should have. It sounded awful and traumatizing. Izuku describes how he moved without thinking and ran to his childhood friend's aid, only to get rescued again by All Might. Then scolded by the other heroes, who had stood by and done nothing to save Bakugu because their quirks were unfit for the job. What is the hero society coming to when pros stand by and do nothing and a child has to try and save the day? Then on his way home, his quirk appeared after 14 years, and All Might, who had been looking for him to apologize, came to his rescue a third time, and offered to train him due to their similar quirks. Shyuda can tell the last part is a lie, but doesn't call Izuku out on it. It's none of his business how his quirk appeared. It's obvious to him that this is a secret between Izuku and All Might, and it's not something he plans on getting involved in. Yet. After a few minutes, Shyuda realizes that Izuku is finished. He hasn't looked up once, and Shyuda is thankful for that. Over the years Shyuda had mastered the art of poker face, but he can only imagine the looks that most definitely crossed his face while Izuku told his story. And he is so glad that he was trusted by Izuku with this story, but he is also extremely horrified. Years of no one supporting or believing in this brilliant boy. And Izuku was obviously brilliant, although a bit stupid and hard-headed. To think no one, not even his own mother, saw his potential. Quirk or no quirk, this child could have been cultivated to be more of a force to be reckoned with than he already was. Shyuda had snuck and read his journal. He was observant. He could gather so much information on a person's quirk and fighting style by watching them for only a few moments. How had no one seen how talented he was? Even Nedu was interested in strengthening his analysis. Also in teaching the boy code, because his journals were dangerous. But what really made his blood boil was the fact that Izuku had been bullied and abused by his childhood friend his entire life and no one stepped in to stop it. Izuku clearly was a master at deceiving his mother and hiding his suffering from her. That's the only reason he didn't march down to Izuku's old apartment and demand to know why she had let something like that go on. You can't blame someone who was being kept in the dark. But the teachers had no excuse. The other students who stood by and did nothing to stop it or report it had no excuse. Izuku was fidgeting on the couch, alternating between looking at the floor or anywhere that wasn't Shyuda. His teacher's quiet rage was radiating off of him, and Izuku could feel it. He wanted to make a run for it, unsure if his teacher was mad at him for being so weak, or the rest of the world. The only thing that kept him rooted to his seat was the knowledge that his teacher could catch him in an instant. Bakugu Katsuki has no excuse. Shyuda was not going to let Bakugu's past crimes go unpunished. And that's what they were, crimes. The use of a quirk in public against another person, without a license, was against the law. Using his quirk to beat another person into SBMSN, and for his own satisfaction, was against the law. Minor or not. These laws were taught since elementary school. It's not like he didn't know them. Bakugu had clearly changed his ways, and had somewhat made up with Izuku after a brutal, past-curfew fight, and was well on his way to being a hero. He would one day make a great one, attitude and all. But hopefully without as much of the attitude. But his past actions were villainous, and he was going to be held accountable for them. Maybe not to the full extent of the law, but he wasn't going to be let off the hook scot-free. Shyuda needed to address this, to prevent Bakugu's ego from becoming his downfall, and to make sure he never treated anyone like that again. Shyuda felt that there was more that Izuku wasn't telling him. Years of undercover work with the vigilantes and interrogating villains had left him with a sense for these things. After enough years as a hero, you develop a sort of instinct and gut feeling. It has yet to let him down. Even the law recognizes these instincts. They had to after the millionth time of a hero explaining that the only reason they knew to go to a location, grab a suspicious person, or just suddenly prepare for a fight was because of a gut feeling. It was an accepted reason for many heroes' actions. The police couldn't deny the accuracy. Not every hero had it, but the ones who had been in the business long enough or had fought enough had it. He wanted to know what Izuku was holding back, but decided not to push for it yet. Izuku had just thrown out a lot of sensitive information. He needed a breather. Not Shyuda digging for more information. Nothing screamed at him that the information was life-threatening, just very important. So Shyuda could hold out for a while longer. So for now, he needed to let the boy in front of him know just how special he was. How much Shyuda believed in him. And that according to Eri, was now a part of their family and had a home with them. After everything Izuku had just admitted, he couldn't help but agree with her. Izuku was a problem child, and was now his problem child. The least he could do was to give Izuku a safe place while everything was dealt with. A place where Shyuda could keep an eye on him. The days ahead were going to be rough, seeing as Shyuda had plans to make that would disturb the little bit of peace that his class had found. Shyuda needed to keep Izuku away from that, and take the proper steps into getting Izuku the help that he needed. Shyuda brushed his hair out of his face and looked at the boy in front of him. Izuku looked like a frightened bird. Like one wrong move or word would spook him into flight. The man was a little concerned about Izuku's mom. He knows that kids can get good at hiding things from their parents. He sure as hell had been. But if Bakugu was actively using his quirk against Izuku, then how had she not noticed? Had she noticed that Izuku had no friends? Had she been bothered by it? Well, even if it did bother her, there wasn't anything she could do. You can't make kids be friends with your son. And unfortunately, It was something that just happened to some kids. Some kids just didn't make friends. Or want them. Shyuda has a deep suspicion that it want just his teachers that were dismissive of the boy. If he had been quirkless so long, then there were probably other adults in his life that didn't treat Izuku well. He would have to look into that. Those teachers at least deserve to have their teaching licenses revoked. Shyuda moved to sit beside Izuku on the couch and once again pulled the boy into his arms, squishing the boy into his side. The tears that Izuku had been holding back burst forth, and he was a sobbing mess all over again. Shyuda slowly rocked them from side to side, arms wrapped tightly around the boy, holding him with all the parental strength he could muster. He pressed his face into Izuku's unruly curls and whispered, "I won't let anyone hurt you like that ever again. I believe in you, and I won't leave you like your father did. You'll get into too much trouble if I did. I get the feeling that you're stuck with me, or I'm stuck with you. So you have Eri and me to support you now." Shyuda squeezes Izuku tighter to his chest and adds sarcastically, "Welcome to the Aizawa family." To his surprise, Izuku giggles, clinging tightly to him and whispers back, "I know, Eri told me what she told you. That sneaky little brat." Shyuda thinks fondly and lets out a laugh of his own. Eri was one determined little girl. She completely bypassed Shyuda and went right to Izuku with her plan. Clever girl. Shyuda knows that he'll have to inform Nedu about all of this, steps will have to be taken, punishments doled out, phone calls made. But for now he lets himself hold his problem child, and will worry about everything later. Possibly after a nap. Yeah, he and Izuku deserve a nice long nap. Shyuda and Izuku had eventually fallen back asleep on the worn leather couch. Izuku was practically draped across him, and Shyuda was sprawled awkwardly with his legs hanging off the side of the couch. Izuku had his face pressed deeply into the crook of Shuda's neck and his fists were clenching Shuda's shirt. He was deeply asleep. Maybe a good long nap will bring the color back into his face and get rid of those awful eye bags. Shyuda thought to himself. Shyuda knew he hadn't been napping long, but hoped the boy would get another hour or two of sleep. He didn't mind being a human body pillow. Hisashi had fallen asleep on him more times than he could count, but he seriously needed to pee and he couldn't put off his responsibilities any longer. So as carefully as he could, Shyuda rolled himself and Izuku onto their sides, reversing their position enough for Shyuda to pry Izuku's hands loose and carefully get up and off the couch. Once he was free, Shyuda quickly made his way to the bathroom to relieve his bladder. Thankfully, long grueling hours of undercover hero work with few restroom breaks had given Shyuda great control over his bladder and how long he could hold it, which Shyuda was thankful for at the moment, because he was about to burst. After his bladder was empty and he had brushed his teeth, brush his hair? Hell no. That was a hassle only Hisashi and Nemuri had the patience to deal with. He ambled to the kitchen, only sparing Izuku a glance to confirm that the boy was still asleep. Sprawled across the couch on his back and drooling slightly. Shyuda had only 1 cup of coffee this morning, an unintentional blasphemy that he intended to correct. 2 cups of coffee in the morning was his usual routine, sometimes 3. He set the coffee maker to brew his favorite blend of coffee, a brand that was very strong and not recommended to weaker coffee drinkers. Hisashi called it heart attack-inducing black poison, after trying a sip of it one time. 1 fing sip. Shyuda had warned him that it was potent, but Hisashi's curiosity was unstoppable. So to everyone's dismay, including Hisashi's, the loud voice hero had been hit with the caffeine full force. He was more hyperactive than usual and had not stopped talking the entire day. His speed talking could rival Izuku's mumbling, especially in volume. Everyone was traumatized, and at the end of the day, Nemuri had had enough and used her quirk to put Hisashi to sleep until the caffeine overdose ended. Hisashi never drank Shuda's coffee again after that. Everyone had looked at Shyuda in horror for almost a week afterwards, unable to believe that not only did he drink this coffee that comes with a warning label but that he could actually take a nap while under its influence. Shyuda had been drinking it for years, so its effect on him had weakened. Not that it had affected him much to begin with. Shyuda sat at the kitchen table, coffee in one hand and his cell phone in the other. He had to let Nedu and the other teachers know what he had discovered. Nedu was the first and most important person to be informed, so he pulled up his email and sent a detailed list of what he had been told. To Nedu Principal. From Aizawa Shyuda. Subject: Midoria Izuku. Here's what I found out so far. I have a feeling that the kid is withholding something from me. But I don't get the feeling that it is life-threatening, so I'm going to let it slide for now and see if I can eventually get him to fess up. Was quirkless until the age of 14. No support from mother over desire to be a hero. We both know he would make a formidable analysis hero. Possibly overprotected or coddled by his mother. Not my preferred style of parenting, but whatever. Father overseas for work. Hasn't seen his father since he was small. Stopped communicating when Izuku was deemed quirkless. Mother is upset over the matter with her husband. Izuku is troubled by her distress. Doesn't let her know it upsets him from what I gathered. Kid doesn't seem to like bothering people with his problems or feelings. Wouldn't put it past him to blame himself for his father's absence and his mother's unhappiness. Was intensely bullied by peers and Bakugu Katsuki all of his life. Teachers did nothing to prevent it and turned a blind eye. Mother was kept in the dark on his bullying. I don't know how she could have missed it. It sounds like Izuku came home with at least some injuries. Was told to commit suicide by Bakugu in middle school in the hopes of gaining a quirk in the next life. Gained a quirk at 14 and was trained by All Might. This part seems fishy to me. I can tell the kid is lying about something, but you know more about All Might on a personal level than I do. I want this to be handled discreetly. While I would prefer to handle this matter myself in my own way, I understand if you feel I am too involved to make appropriate decisions. I don't think I would be irrational, but I do feel very strongly about this, and we both know how my temper can get. I plan to give the other teachers a less detailed explanation and will omit Bakugu's name for now. Please reply quickly. Sincerely, Aizawa. Shyuda reread his email before sending it. He got up and fixed himself a cup of coffee, black as tar, and sat back down at the table, sipping his coffee slower than he had this morning. He opened up the teachers' group chat on his phone to give the teachers more of a heads up than what Nedu had probably told them. Teachers of Disasters group chat. Aizawa is online. Aizawa, I have disturbing information regarding Midoria. Loud Kakatuya is online. Loud Kakatuya, spill. Loud Kakatuya. I mean, I already know most of it. But if you got new deets then spill. Midnight Madness is online. Loud Kakatuya, Green Bean Hero Protection Team Unite. Midnight Madness, Hizashi? Really? Is that really your username? How is the little green bean show? Midnight Madness, does he need a cuddle? Midnight Madness, does he need a chest to lay his head on? Snipe, Blood King, All Might and 3 others are online. Midnight Madness, BC I have a BRST. Midnight Madness, chest. Midnight Madness, chest. I have a chest. Snipe, don't act like you meant anything other than BRST. Snipe, you know you love squishing people between your hooters. Aizawa, can you all FING focus? Midnight Madness, sorry dad. Snipe, sorry pops. Aizawa, all of you. All Might is typing. Aizawa, All Might just stop. Aizawa, USCK at texting. So just stop. Aizawa, I'll discuss this with you in more detail later. After school hours. So log off. Loud Kakatuya, oh. All Might, Aizawa I would like to be informed on my student just like the others. All Might, Nvrmnd. Nzu would like to speak to me. All Might is offline. Midnight Madness, Asvishko. Blood King, Midnight Ixi, has stopped working. Midnight Madness, oh yeah. Midnight Madness, Shyuda? Midnight Madness, the green bean? Aizawa is typing. Snipe, what's wrong with the lil rascal? Loud Kakatuya, Shyuda is it worse than what you told me this morning? Loud Kakatuya, Suda. Loud Kakatuya, is it? Snipe? Midnight Madness, Hizashi let the man type. Shyuda sighed, sipping his coffee. Texting these assholes was a pain. Aizawa, so. Aizawa, Midoria is stressing over his mom being alone now that he is living in the dorms. She misses her husband. Can't imagine why. Midnight Madness, Chill Shyuda. Loud Kakatuya, point Shyuda. Aizawa, Hizashi. Aizawa, don't rush me. Aizawa, the man hasn't been in their lives since Izuku was small. Aizawa, dropped almost all contact when he was deers, thought he was quirkless. Didn't get one till he was bullied since 5, no friends till high school. Loud Kakatuya, my poor baby. Snipe, does he like hats? Snipe, gonna get him a cowboy hat. Aizawa, told to jump off roof in middle school. Midnight Madness, fucking what? Snipe, what some bitches said that to him? Snipe, gonna go yeehaw on their buttes? Midnight Madness, the F is going yeehaw on their buttes? Shyuda could just hear Hizashi's voice in the distance screaming, what the actual F dash? What motherfucking piece of shit said that? I'll fight their beach butt. The dorms were a good distance away from the school. Hizashi was at the school, which meant that Hizashi was cursing while using his quirk. Inside the school. Poor kids. Aizawa, shut the F up before you wake problem child. Midnight Madness, on it. Blood King, on it. After a few seconds, the cursing stopped. Loud Kakatuya, sorry. I just couldn't hold it in. Loud Kakatuya, that like hurt my soul. Midnight Madness, who would treat that angel like that? He is nothing but kind and helpful. Loud Kakatuya, that baby stepped on an ant and apologized. Loud Kakatuya, too pure. Blood King, quirk discrimination at its worst if you ask me. Blood King, only reason I can see why anyone would attack the kid. Midnight Madness, that's not a good reason. That shouldn't be a reason. Loud Kakatuya, word. Blood King, didn't say it was a good reason. There is never a good reason for that sheet. Aizawa, going to find out more soon. Hopefully. Aizawa, Hizashi, same. But got to hold it together for the kid. Also maybe you could talk to him after school? You are better when it comes to dealing with feelings. And I'm reaching my limit on how nice I can be. Need an emotional break. Midnight Madness. Oh. If you two weren't practically brothers I would ship you. Snipe. Gagging noises, you know your dirty mind ships them anyway. Brick by brick. What is ship? Loud Kakatuya. Ishiyama been lurking. Loud Kakatuya. The elusive Cementos has come out of hiding. Loud Kakatuya. Shyuda. Quick. Use capture. Shyuda rolled his eyes. He was about to respond when he heard Izuku move around some, then yawn. Aizawa. GTG kid is waking up. Aizawa is offline. Shyuda got up and made his way into the living room at the first sounds that Izuku was beginning to wake up. Izuku was in the process of stretching, still laying on his back on the couch, and had his eyes closed. Sipping the last bit of his coffee, he waited for the boy to become aware of his surroundings. Shyuda watched as Izuku slowly blinked his eyes open, like a cat would, propping himself up on his arms. Izuku lazily looked around the room until his eyes landed on Shyuda. A blush quickly spread across his face, realizing that he had fallen asleep in his teacher's arms for a second time in less than 24 hours. The blush was short-lived and his face rapidly began to pale. Shyuda watched in alarm as the boy's face went from bright red to sickly pale in a matter of seconds. His eyes were wide and his pupils were dilated. He seemed to be on the verge of a panic attack. Before Shyuda could move towards him, Izuku shot up off the couch and dashed into the bathroom. Shyuda placed his empty coffee cup on the table and rushed after him, only to be met with the sounds of Izuku throwing up his little bit of breakfast into the toilet. Deepening panic attacks. Shyuda bypassed the boy hanging onto the toilet, dry heaving once he had thrown up everything he had eaten along with some stomach acid. Grabbed a washcloth from a drawer under the sink and quickly wet it with cold water, wringing it out before he made his way back to the boy. Shyuda crouched down and placed the cold cloth on the back of Izuku's neck. Having a cold cloth pressed on the neck or face was one of the many ways to slow an anxiety attack. He's not sure why, just that it works. Hey, it's okay. You're okay, Shyuda said calmly, holding the washcloth to the boy's neck with one hand, while rubbing soothing circles between his shoulders with his other hand. You're fine. I promise. I know this has been too much too fast. But everything will be fine. Trust me. Izuku was leaning over the toilet, breathing erratically. Skiing in short, sharp breaths. Close to hyperventilating. Cold not working. New plan. Shyuda sat down behind Izu, foregoing rubbing his back in preference to pulling the boy's back to his chest and circling his arms around him. Holding him tightly. Holding the kid seems to be becoming a habit. Breath with me. Shyuda instructed, taking a deep breath and holding it before slowly releasing it. He did this repeatedly until he felt Izuku shakily trying to mimic him. It took a while before they were both breathing deeply, in sync with each other. This was a mild and short panic attack, and Shyuda was grateful for that. Sure, the kid had thrown up from panic, but at least it was over almost as quickly as it came. He didn't know if he could deal with a longer one. Shyuda sat with Izuku for a while, both males just focusing on breathing. Shyuda was still holding Izuku to his chest with one arm, while he ran his hand through the boy's hair with the other. That seemed to calm the teen even more, and he could feel Izuku relaxing against his chest. I'll have to remember that petting his hair calms him down quickly. What is he, a kitten? Once Shyuda was sure that Izuku was calmer and on the last legs of his panic attack, he pulled the boy to his feet and walked him out of the bathroom. Deciding that they had one too many fall-apart sessions in the living room, Shyuda pulled Izuku along to his bedroom. Shyuda left Izuku to stand by the bed while he rummaged around in his closet. I should probably organize this mess. Finally finding his spare sleeping bag among the mess, he pulled it from the closet. After giving it a few quick shakes to air it out, he tossed it onto the bed next to Izuku. Izuku flinched away from it, looking at the yellow sleeping bag with wide eyes. Does he think it has demonic powers or something? Get in, Shyuda ordered. The absolutely shocked look on Izuku's face was hilarious, and Shyuda had to keep himself from snorting. Izuku started to protest, but Shyuda just crossed his arms and glared the boy into SBMs. The sleeping bag always brought Shyuda a sense of calm, being safely enveloped in its warmth, cocooned away from the world. He could only hope that Izuku would be able to feel the same security and safety too. It was a hunch, but the way the boy would relax when being held gave Shyuda a reason to believe that it would have a similar effect. Izuku slowly and awkwardly climbed into the sleeping bag on the bed and zipped himself up, an embarrassed blush dusting his cheeks. As far as anyone knew, Shyuda never shared his sleeping bag. Which was almost true. Until Eri came along, Hisashi had been the only one to ever have the honor of curling up in the yellow monstrosity. It was usually after the blonde man had some terrifying encounter with a bug, and Shyuda would wrap him up in the bag's safety while he eliminated the vile bug. Eri, on the other hand, crawled into the sleeping bag whenever she discovered Shyuda in it. Or Shyuda would wrap it around her after she had a nightmare. Do you know why you just had a panic attack? Shyuda asked. Izuku nodded his head and whispered hoarsely, remembered telling you everything and panicked. Shyuda nodded his head and flopped down onto the floor, leaning his back up against the closet door, giving Izuku a few minutes to calm himself. Just chill over there for a while and relax, Shyuda ordered. Panic attacks were stressful and tiring. He reached over to his bedside table and grabbed a hair tie, pulling his hair up into a loose bun before settling back down against the door. While he waited for Izuku to relax more, he felt the soft vibrations from his phone and took it out of his pocket to check it. Nedu had replied to his email. Looking up, he glanced at Izuku, who was watching him, worrying his bottom lip between his teeth. Probably nervous about what the vibration of his phone meant. It's just a report from my agency that I need to read over. Shyuda lied smoothly. It was a logical ruse to keep the boy from having another panic attack. He doesn't need to know it's about him. While I'm reading, I want you to count backwards from 300, slowly and out loud. Counting was a good way to calm oneself and was a good distraction. Shyuda used this technique a lot when dealing with his hell class. Izuku nodded his head and began to softly count backwards. Satisfied that the boy was distracted with counting and not thinking about the phone, Shyuda opened the email and began to read. To Aizawa Shyuda. From Nedu, UA Principal. Subject: Midoria Izuku. Aizawa, thank you for the information. I can only imagine how stressed Midoria must be at the moment. I am very disappointed in the fact that Bakugu Katsuki acted this way, and rest assured that his actions will not go unpunished. I will allow you to set the guidelines of how this should be handled, Given that you are the homeroom teacher and dorm master for both boys, and you have the most experience with them, you have always been strict but fair, and I have no doubt that you will handle this accordingly. As for confronting the issue yourself, I believe that it would be best left to All Might to handle. I do not doubt your ability to control yourself despite your temper, and I know that both you and All Might are almost equally invested in the boys. However, I feel that having All Might reprimand Bakugu will have more effect, having been an influence in his life longer than you. Not that I don't believe Bakugu respects you, I just feel having All Might reprimand him will hurt his pride more. Having his all-time favorite hero punish him will hopefully have that desired effect. I do wish for you to confront Mrs. Midoria yourself. When I suggested that All Might do so, he seemed to be nervous. Something about how she had very nearly pulled Izuku for Yue's failures at keeping her son safe, and how he couldn't stand to face her with another failure. I tried to reason that he wasn't at fault for something that happened before he met Midoriya, but it fell on deaf ears. So I leave that to you. I would suggest doing so tomorrow, that is when I have planned for Bakugu's parents to be fought in to address the situation. Yours sincerely, Nedu. Shyuda read the email quickly, glancing up under his eyelashes every so often to make sure the problem child wasn't paying him too much attention. He trusted All Might to handle this. The man may be a blundering idiot when it came to teaching, but not when it came to justice and protecting those in need. Especially when it was Izuku in need. A disappointed and angry All Might was enough to make any student fall apart, no matter how tough and prideful they were. Bakugu's ego wouldn't stand a chance. Shyuda quickly typed out his reply so he could return his attention to Izuku, who was down to 2. Nedu, Yue Principal. From Aizawa Shyuda. Subject: punishment. This will go on Bakugu's school record, and he will receive a mark on his hero license. He will be suspended for 2 weeks, and on house arrest at home with his family. He will have to attend mandatory anger management classes and emotional therapy in order to continue being a UA student. If he doesn't cooperate, he will be expelled. This is required until he graduates. He will not be allowed to sit next to Midoriya during classes, and until he has permission from his therapists, he will not directly work in hero training alongside Midoriya. He can still participate, just not with or near Midoriya. I will not have another event like with All Might's heroes versus villains. They will be kept separate until the therapists and I am convinced that he is not a threat to Midoriya, and until the Midoriya gives his consent for Bakugu to be a part of his life again. We both know that Midoriya will accept Bakugu back with open arms. I want a handwritten apology from Bakugu to Midoriya before his suspension is up. I want Tsukachi to be present during Bakugu's meeting. I don't think Bakugu will lie, but better safe than sorry. I don't want Bakugu trying to warp things to make himself not look like the perpetrator. Midoriya and I will not return to classes until Monday to allow for Midoriya to recover emotionally. He seems very sensitive at the moment. Or at least more sensitive than usual. Midoriya will also be receiving therapy for mental and physical abuse. Midoriya will be moving in with me. So a small house on campus would be greatly appreciated. I don't believe it will be beneficial for the 2 boys to be under the same roof. It will also allow Midoriya some privacy once it is revealed to the students the reason behind their classmates' absences. Not in full detail, but the gist of it. I don't want to risk the class turning against Bakugu. And the last thing we need is a class civil war with the Baku squad against the Deku squad. I am going to ban Midoriya from using his phone for a few days, so please inform his classmates not to try and contact him. I doubt they will listen. Sincerely, Aizawa. Finished with his email, Shyuda sent it to the principal and pocketed his phone. Izuku was currently on. Shyuda cleared his throat to get the boy's attention. You can stop now. The boy sighed in relief, clearly tired of counting. He did look more relaxed than earlier, clearly the sleeping bag was working its magic. Shyuda stood up from the floor, leaning backwards a bit to crack his back. When Shyuda finished, Izuku's wide-eyed stare was clearly he had heard all the popping sounds Shyuda's back had made. Shyuda jutted his jaw forward, ping one eyebrow and giving Izuku his best haughty look. He grumbled, "Don't look at me like that, Mr. Breaks his bones like it's his job. You'll sound like me one day too, if you don't already. You also have more scars than me, a 31-year-old, who's been an underground hero for almost 13 years. You have been in the Hero Corps student for almost 1 year and have broken your arms and legs multiple times and have scars littering your body. You have no room to gawk at me. Shyuda stalked out of the room after seeing Izuku's indignant expression. The loud thump from the bedroom was probably Izuku trying to rush after Shyuda without removing the sleeping bag first. Shyuda snorted, ignoring the fact that he had done that plenty of times himself. Shyuda ignored the soft sheet he heard come from Izuku, followed by the rustling of the sleeping bag being removed and the quick sounds of Izuku running barefoot after him. "You'll catch a cold walking around barefoot," Shyuda scolded him. He himself had on a pair of dark gray socks that may or may not have pink cat paw prints on the bottoms. Izuku merely hummed in response to this as they made their way into the kitchen. Izuku quickly sat down at the table, not wanting to be underfoot. Shyuda set to work making a filling lunch for them both to enjoy, seeing how Izuku had puked up his breakfast. "You a Mr. Aizawa?" Izuku called softly. Shyuda didn't turn around from his task, but hummed to show that he was listening. "What happens now?" he asked. Shyuda could hear just the hint of panic in his voice. Not wanting Izuku to work himself into another panic, Shyuda decided to lighten the mood before they delved into the topic. So, stopping what he was doing, Shyuda spun around with his widest and wildest grin and answered, "We're going to throw Bakugu into a volcano as an overly angry version sacrifice." Izuku's horrified expression at seeing Shyuda's grin slowly morphed into one of pure delight as he doubled over and was completely overtaken by a fit of giggles. He had tears in his eyes and could barely catch his breath. Good to know that the kid doesn't have any problem trolling the explosive brat. Satisfied, Shyuda returned to his task, letting his manic grin turn softer and more fond. "Finally, something good. I've been feeling like I just keep stressing the kid out, without any sign of there being a light at the end of the tunnel." Izuku's giggling fit ended just as Shyuda was finishing up their lunch. It wasn't anything fancy, rice and leftover miso soup from yesterday's dinner. He placed Izuku's bowls in front of him, then gathered his own and sat down on the opposite side of the table facing the boy. They quietly ate for a few minutes, no one ready to disturb the peaceful and somewhat happy bubble Shyuda's joke had created. But all good. Things must come to an end, so he set his utensils aside and rubbed the back of his neck. "Kid, we're going to go talk to your mother tomorrow about everything. But that's for the you of tomorrow to worry about. Right now I want you to listen to some things I have to say." Shyuda waited for Izuku to respond. He was glad to notice the boy had almost finished all of his rice and half of his soup. Setting his utensils down too, Izuku nodded his head and whispered his okay. "Bakugu's not being expelled." Shyuda began. Izuku relaxed as if a weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. "Of course the brat is worried about Bakugu," Shyuda realized, hiding his irritation behind taking a sip of his drink. After he set his glass down, he continued. "All Might and Nedu will be holding a meeting with him and his parents tomorrow, which is why we will be going to speak with your mother. I'll call her later to let her know we will be paying her a visit. I'm not going to discuss with you what Bakugu's meeting will hold. Just know that he is being punished, though not as severely as he could be. With the League having shown an interest in him, his determination and his potential, I'm unwilling to expel him. That doesn't mean I won't, if he refuses to acknowledge his mistakes and take the steps to fix them. It is also going to take a lot of effort and time to get back in my good graces." Izuku nodded his head and fiddled with his fingers. That was more than anything his teachers had ever done. He can't say he was surprised by Mr. Aizawa's decision, but he was worried that his teacher might be being a little too harsh. After all, Kaken had so much potential, he just had a hard time expressing his emotions and controlling his anger. That, along with his quirk, just made him a bomb with a short fuse. It wasn't something he could really help. Izuku had learned over the years how best to avoid setting him off or how to avoid him altogether. He had also mellowed out some after entering UA and discovering he was no longer the top dog. No one knew Kaken like he knew him. He didn't really mean the insults and threats he said most of the time, it was just his automatic reaction. Kaken just didn't have a filter and rarely thought before he spoke. Maybe he could get his phone and send a text explaining this to All Might and plead for him to be lenient with Kaken. After all, Kaken looked up to All Might as much as Izuku did. Maybe, Izuku! Shyuda's shout drew Izuku out of the muttering spell he had fallen into. Shyuda sighed. He wanted to go bury himself in his bed and ignore all his responsibilities for a year. You are not texting All Might, Shyuda said, glaring at the boy in front of him. Said boy let out a huff and looked away, glaring at the floor. Well, hello, attitude. Shyuda was impressed that Izuku had the nerve to huff at him, but given the fact that Izuku had cried all over him, fallen asleep on him, and thrown up in front of him, a little sass wasn't too unexpected. The boy was stressed to the max, so a little sass was warranted. He also knew that the boy had a bit of a sassy streak in him. So where was I? Shyuda mumbled to himself. Oh yeah, no phone privileges for a while. Izuku's eyes snapped back up to Shyuda in shock. A teenager without their phone? It was the ultimate form of torture. Shyuda reveled in Izuku's horror. It's just so your friends can't harass you. And to make sure Bakugu doesn't try texting you tomorrow. You're also going to live with me. I put in a request for a little house to be set up for you, Eri, and me here on campus. I'm not comfortable with you living with Bakugu right now. You are going to be going to therapy. That's not up for debate. It's something you need. Shyuda quickly added, seeing Izuku was about to protest. Your classmates will no doubt try and drown you with love and support. Nothing wrong with that, but you need the freedom to move around and process things without constantly being bombarded by them. I get the feeling that they would try to stick to you like glue. Shyuda concluded. Izuku sat quietly, processing everything Shyuda had told him. After a few minutes of organizing his thoughts, Izuku resigned himself to his fate. Is there anything else I should know about? Izuku asked, looking over at Shyuda. Nodding, Shyuda looked to the side. He was uncomfortable, but he would do anything to help his problem child. Yeah, Shyuda began. I asked Present Mike to come over and talk to you. He's good at giving emotional support and helping people deal with their feelings. He may be a loud mouth, but he's a great listener and almost always knows the best ways to help someone. He's helped me a lot. Shyuda admitted. Why would you need to be helped a lot? Izuku asked, clearly confused. Izuku couldn't fathom his teacher ever being anything but stoic and capable. Shyuda blushed. Without his capture weapon to hide behind, his blush was very noticeable on his fair skin. Izuku watched Shyuda blush in awe. Eraserhead, blushing? It was mind-boggling for the teen. Shyuda hated talking about himself, but if it could help Izuku deal with his own problems, then he would go through it. A hero's job is to help those in need, however they can. And it was even more detrimental, seeing as he was also a teacher, and was responsible for his students' well-being. Well, Shyuda coughed once out of nervousness before he continued. When Hisashi and I were first years at UA, he found out about my less than desirable home life. He stepped up and made sure I was safe, and helped me through it. I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't have been there by my side through it all. Izuku was shocked and looked like he had a million questions. Before he could ask any, Shyuda stood up. Let's continue this in the living room. Shyuda suggested. If he was going to tell Izuku his story, then it was best that they were comfortable, because it was a long story. Shyuda was 4 years and 3 weeks old when he gained his quirk. It was combination of his parents' quirks. His mother had a weak levitation quirk. It allowed her to levitate anything that she was looking at a few inches off the ground. The quirk cancelled out once she blinked. His father's quirk was the ability to weaken any quirks that were directly next to him. It was a mutation quirk that was always active. His father's entire eyes were a glowing red. When Shyuda first discovered his quirk, he proudly marched up to parents to inform them. Like any small child would, he thought that his family would praise him for having such an interesting quirk. He felt that it was the perfect combination of theirs. He was naive. The discord in his family was fairly new, and his young mind couldn't see any reason for them not to be happy about his discovery. He was only 4 after all. He didn't know better yet. In the living room of their small apartment, both of his parents sat, ignoring each other. His father sat on a stained light blue felt couch, watching their small TV and drinking beer. He drank beer a lot lately. His mother sat on a slightly darker blue love seat, to the right of his father. She was reading one of those celebrity magazines from the corner store. His mother was more peaceful than his father, who recently was almost always angry. She was more likely to just brush him off, to tell Shyuda not to bother her and send him away. Shyuda missed his mother's warm hugs. He can't remember when she stopped being warm. He chose to approach her with the newly acquired information, seeing her as the safer option. Shyuda crept around the sofa over to his mother and tugged on her pants leg to get her attention. She sighed, looking away from her magazine and down at him. "What is it, Sho-chan?" His mother asked him. Shyuda loved it when she called him Sho-chan. It made him feel safe. Feel loved. Shyuda smiled. The use of his nickname was a sign that she was in a good mood. Shyuda smiled up at her shyly. He wasn't a child prone to smiling often, twisting the hem of his, just a little too big shirt. "I got my quirk, mommy," Shyuda blurted, bursting with joy at having gained his quirk a little earlier than his classmates at preschool. None of them had gotten theirs yet. "Oh?" his mother asked, clearly a little shocked that it had developed so soon after turning 4, but pleased that he was an early bloomer. Shyuda had always been a fast learner and liked to do things right away, just so he wouldn't have to learn to do them later. Why do it tomorrow when you can do it today? So it should be no surprise that his quirk followed that example. "And what is your quirk?" she asked, expecting it to be either hers or his father's. Children rarely got mixed versions if the parents' quirks were different or didn't follow some theme. "I can stop someone's quirk by looking at them," he announced proudly, looking up at her with bright dark eyes. Just like hers. He had spent the better part of the morning on the landing of their apartment, experimenting with the old lady that lived next door, Mrs. Akashi. Shyuda liked to sit on the landing and watch the people on the street below walk past, looking down on them like a hero observing those he had to protect. His neighbor, an old widow who was almost completely deaf, loved to join him. Her apartment was the last one on their floor, so not having to worry about people needing to get around her, she would pull out her rocking chair and would sit knitting while people watched. He would sit holding the ball of yarn, unrolling it as she needed. He was a helpful boy, and Mrs. Akashi called him her hero. That's what they had been doing this morning. His parents arguing, while not loud, had woken him up. Not being able to fall back asleep, Shyuda had crept out of the apartment, with the help of a step stool his mother had placed by the door for such occasions. Better to be able to get out on his own than to have to draw attention to himself. It was very common to find Shyuda sitting or playing by himself on the landing. There weren't any other children within walking distance, and living in the less than desirable part of town, Shyuda wasn't allowed to wander around on his own. So there they both sat that morning, Mrs. Akashi knitting, and Shyuda holding the ball of yarn, when he started to feel strange. His eyes started to burn and itch, and he felt his short hair start to rise. Almost as if his mom had held the blow dryer near him, causing his hair to lift from the air current. But just as quickly as it started, it stopped. His eyes still burned and itched some, but not like before. His hair also resumed its natural state, the wavy locks lying against his head again. It was strange. Realizing what was happening, he quickly got his neighbor's attention and sloppily signed to her. She had been teaching him the basics of JSL because she couldn't really hear anymore. They had spent a couple of hours experimenting, and had learned that as long as he looked at someone without blinking he could stop their quirk, even if it was only for 10 seconds. Mrs. Akashi's quirk was the ability to make her hands glow like a very bright night light, and Shyuda practiced erasing it, over and over until his eyes burned too much. Much to Mrs. Akashi's amusement and Shyuda's dismay, his hair floated every time he used his quirk. He had hoped that it was a one-time fluke or the wind, because floating hair just seemed impractical and silly. Shyuda was also not pleased that his irises turned a glowing red. They reminded him too much of his father's angry red eyes. Shyuda was standing proudly in front of his mother, waiting to be complimented on such a cool quirk. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. His father slammed his beer can onto their wooden coffee table, spilling beer at the impact. He growled out, "What do you mean you can fucking stop quirks? I can't even do that, you bastard brat." His father slurred his words a bit, clearly in the beginning stages of drunkenness. Shyuda spun around and pressed his back into his mother's legs, intimidated by the man in front of him. His father wasn't a tall man or even a muscular man, but to a small 4-year-old boy he might as well have been as big as a bear. He looked at his father with wide, fearful eyes. While his father hadn't ever hit him or his mother, his loud voice and vicious words were scary and hurt. His father had always had a quick temper, but his temper never seemed to leave anymore. Shyuda missed the days when his father would ruffle his hair or fly him to his room. Holding Shyuda in his large hands, zooming Shyuda around in the air before depositing him in his bed. His mother placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and gave it a gentile squeeze. She stayed seated, knowing that if she stood up, her husband would take it as a challenge. Keeping her voice soft and calm, she quickly tried to defuse the situation. "Hun, you know this is how quirks tend to work. Kids' quirks are usually stronger than their parents'. Your quirk is stronger than your mother's after all." "Shut up, cow." His father growled at his mother. Shyuda knew that his mother hated when she was called that. She was a bit sturdier than most women, not fat by any means, she just wasn't slender or petite. If she trained, she would have had the body shape perfect for boxing. "I knew that," his father continued. "But it ain't right for the worthless brat to have a quirk better on me. He ain't gonna fucking amount to nothing anyway." His mother nodded along, agreeing with his father to placate him. She slowly nudged Shyuda towards his bedroom. Standing up herself, she slowly walked over to her husband and offered to get him another beer. Shyuda quietly made his way to his room, and once inside he closed his door, then threw himself face down on his bed. A soft sob making its way out of his throat. He didn't like to cry, didn't see the point in crying, but 4-year-olds don't have great control over their emotions. So he cried into his pillow, trying not to make any noise that would draw the attention of those in the living room. His mother disliked crying more than his father did. Things continued like that. His father telling him he would be nothing because his quirk was nothing. His mother agreeing so as not to aggravate his father. His father became angrier and more mentally and physically abusive, and his mother more distant and at times violent towards him too. Not being able to take her anger out on her husband, the one who caused her unhappiness, she slowly began to turn it on her son. If she wasn't ignoring him, she would pinch him or push him, one time going so far as to even slap him. His only safe haven was the landing and his neighbor. Time skip. Shyuda was 14 and in middle school, preparing for entrance exams for high school. Shyuda was at school, it was few months before the school break, and he sat silently at his desk at the back of the classroom. He was studying the syllabus for the school he hoped to attend, UA. His parents had no idea he was planning on joining the hero school, and for good reason. The last time he had mentioned that he wanted to be a hero, he had been 9. His father had yelled at him that he could never be a hero with his useless quirk. He would only get himself and others killed, his quirk was fucking worthless, he was fucking worthless. Said his father had gone on a rampage, bearing into Shyuda's room and gathering all his hero merchandise, it wasn't much, and tossed it in a trash bag. He had forced Shyuda to go and throw it in the dumpster himself, threatening Shyuda not to even try and keep one thing or else he would punish him. Shyuda never mentioned wanting to be a hero ever again, just kept his dream close to his heart. He was older now, capable of taking care of himself, something his parents expected him to do. He had learned early on how to forge their signatures, and thankfully they didn't care what he did with his life, as long as it wasn't anything illegal and that he was home by curfew. They did not want him doing anything that would have the police brought to them. They didn't care what school he went to and he didn't plan on telling them which one it was either. He knew if his father found out he would force him to choose another school, so he wasn't going to let that happen. Shyuda sat at his desk, drilling all the information he could into his brain so as to be ready for the preliminary exam for UA. Shyuda had learned that not only did UA have an entrance exam, but you had to pass a preliminary exam just to be able to take it. Thankfully Shyuda had always been smart, and years of being friendless. No one wanted to be friends with the antisocial boy whose quirk erased quirks and who dressed like a hobo, meant that he had plenty of free time to devote to studying. Also having no friends meant that he didn't have to try and hide his home life. Being friendless was a blessing and was logical. That's what Shyuda told himself as he watched groups of friends laugh and cut up with each other. He did not need that. He did not want that. He ignored the ache in his chest that said otherwise. Once school was out for the day, he quickly made his way home and to his neighbor's apartment. This was his routine: leave for school after his parents left for work, grab the bento from next door that Mrs. Akashi made for him every day. Go to school, leave and hang out at his neighbor's apartment and eat dinner there. Hang out on the landing until right before curfew, sneak into his room for a change of clothes, sneak to the bathroom for a quick shower, then sneak back to his room for the rest of the night. Shyuda had become an expert at stealth. He rarely got caught. When he did, he usually got smacked on the back of the head or tripped up for creeping around. His neighbor knew that things were strained with his family, but being deaf meant that she never heard to what extent. So there was nothing she could do but coddle Shyuda as much as she could and give him the love he was lacking in his life. The other neighbors didn't care and knew to mind their own business, some of them having similar issues as his family. Domestic disputes and violence were common in his neighborhood and were rarely reported, most people being on the wrong side of the law in one way or another. Shyuda had dinner with her like he did every day. She was an amazing cook, but despite her best efforts of teaching him, Shyuda could only grasp the basics. They sat chatting together after dinner until time for Shyuda to leave. After hanging out on the landing for a while, Shyuda crept into his apartment and safely went about his routine and went to bed. The next day was Saturday, and Shyuda had plans to go to the library to study. His father usually slept late on the weekends, so he only expected to see his mother when he woke up this morning. He should have been more careful, should have paid closer attention, but he was excited to have the whole day to himself. He usually spent his weekends helping his aging neighbor with chores that were becoming more difficult for her. Shyuda seriously thought of Mrs. Akashi as his grandmother, not that he would ever admit it out loud. So seeing his father standing in the kitchen, only a few feet from the front door talking with his mother, it made his legs lock in place. His flight response failing him at the worst possible moment. His father turned to him after noticing him out of the corner of his eye. His face scrunched up in displeasure as he walked over to Shyuda. He swung his fist out towards Shyuda's face, stopping only a few inches in front of his nose. Shyuda automatically flinched. He couldn't help it, even after so many years of his father doing that, he still flinched every time. He was always on edge, expecting it, but he was never able to stop that DMN flinch. He knew it was because it was his father doing it that caused him to flinch. Unsure if his father would actually stop before hitting him. There had been a few times when he didn't. And it was always somehow Shyuda's fault. Being told, if you hadn't have fucking moved then I wouldn't have hit ya, or, you was too close. It was always Shyuda's fault. His father busted out laughing as Shyuda slightly curled into himself. Made ya flinch. He laughed, doing it once more and laughing when Shyuda flinched again. Of course Shyuda flinched, it was a conditioned response at this point. His nerves were too shot when it came to his father. This was one of his many intimidation tactics that he used against Shyuda, ensuring that he was too frightened to even consider fighting back. Not that Shyuda would have, hitting back would only result in him getting hit harder, a fact he had learned when he was 12. He was smaller than his father and untrained, he wouldn't stand a chance. He also didn't want to ruin his chances of going to UA by being involved in a domestic dispute. His father had many ways to bully Shyuda and the flinching game was one of the nicer ones. His father, whenever he could corner Shyuda, would push him into walls, not hard enough to break anything, just to slightly bruise him. Sit on his back where he couldn't get up and escape. Having someone bigger than you sitting on top of you while holding you face down was terrifying and left Shyuda feeling vulnerable and powerless. His father was also very heavy and his weight hurt Shyuda's back. His father used to lock Shyuda in his room until Shyuda had bought a screwdriver. Mrs. Akashi gave him an allowance, and started using it to remove his door handle and using a coat hanger to escape. His father has never found where Shyuda keeps it hidden. He also had managed to get a lock for the inside of his room, and had put it up one day when both his parents were out. He made sure to lock it at night, not that they ever bothered him, but it was better safe than sorry. He will smack Shyuda across the arm hard, never enough to bruise deeply, in passing, telling Shyuda to man up, or stop being a PP, if he ever complains or whines. Calls Shyuda every vulgar or derogatory word he could think of, saying things to emasculate him, towering over him and yelling insults in his face. PP. Fgot-looking prick. Weak but beach. You look like a pansy but girl? Act like a man. You ain't no diamond PP sucker. Shyuda's heard them all. Which is what his father was doing now, having grown tired of making Shyuda flinch. He had reached out and was gripping the collar of Shyuda's baggy shirt tightly. What the F is with your hair? He screeched in Shyuda's face. You wanna be a fucking girl? SCK so bad at being the man you gone and turned into one of them PP boys? You like D now or something? He shoved Shyuda, who stumbled and fell to the floor hard, the strap of his school bag slipping off his shoulder and pooling around his wrist. Shyuda's hair wasn't too long, it barely reached his shoulders. He had been meaning to get it cut. It annoyed him how his hair floated up when he used his quirk. It was a dead giveaway that his quirk was active, more than the red color that his eyes changed to. Keeping it short was the logical decision, but long hours of studying over the past few months with barely any free time to stop and get it cut had resulted in it being longer than it had ever been. He had been planning to get it cut after his visit to the library, but now he felt a bit of rebelliousness seep into him. If it bothered his father so much, then he was going to keep it, just to PSS his old man off. He knew in the back of his mind, as he listened to his father go on a homophobic rant about FGS being everywhere now, that keeping his hair long wasn't the wisest decision. It would only fuel his father's rage, act as a target for his father and mother to tug harshly. He watched as his mother nodded her head in agreement with his father, acting as a united front. She had learned that agreeing with her husband no matter what, especially if it was against Shyuda, pleased her husband and made him less likely to turn on her. She had thrown away motherly instinct years ago in preference for self-preservation. His father loved it when she agreed with him, inflating his ego. He was always likely to treat her good for the rest of the day when she did that, making sure to treat her especially well that night. Shyuda slept out on the landing on those nights. His father didn't even bother to keep his voice down, and didn't move the bed frame so that Shyuda wouldn't have to hear it slamming against the wall repeatedly. His father always laughed the next day, telling Shyuda that it was educational for Shyuda to hear, saying it did Shyuda good to hear how to F woman good, so he wouldn't want to take no D in the butt. Shyuda always threw up after those nights. Even if he had been outside and couldn't hear anything, he could still remember the times that he had heard. He also would be unable to eat the rest of the days after those nights. His mother, while not as abusive as his father, had her moments where she lashed out at Shyuda. Shyuda had been slapped across the face by her numerous times now, never hard enough to leave anything other than a light redness to his cheek that faded after a few minutes, but still made his head rock back from the impact. He sat on the floor, trying to keep his face neutral. He didn't cry, he hadn't cried in years. He had trained himself out of it, and the constant dryness in his eyes from his quirk only acted to help his resolve. He was keeping his face neutral as to not show the burning hatred that he felt for his parents. What had he done to deserve this kind of treatment from them? Nothing. His brain, always logical, supplied for him. He had done nothing to be treated this way. But as far as abuse went, Shyuda was positive that his situation was better than others. He was never badly physically hurt. He wasn't sure a few bruises here and there would count as abuse. He could survive this until he turned 18. It's not like they were trying to kill him. Just break him. He knew that trying to stand would only get him pushed back down, and trying to run was out of the question with his father towering over him. His father would only wait by the door to ambush him the moment he returned home, being more aggressive at having been disrespected by Shyuda running away. So he sat and waited until the attention shifted off of him, or until his father got bored. His father growing tired of his wife's constant agreeing and turned on her. Agreeing with him too much set him off because he saw it as her being insincere. He moved into the kitchen to try and tower over Shyuda's mother, which was hard considering they were close to the same height. Shyuda was the shortest, barely reaching his father's chest. He hasn't had a growth spurt yet. His short stature and slim figure only convinced his father more that Shyuda wasn't a man. And you? His father growled at his mother. You're the reason he's like this beach. Babed him too much as a child. Ranting at her, throwing insults at her and complaining about Shyuda not being a man and never going to be a man, and it not mattering if Shyuda had a D or not because he was just a PP. Having heard enough, Shyuda quickly crawled to the door, dragging his bag behind him, and slipped out to the safety of the outside world. Once free of the oppressive apartment, he stood up and dashed down the landing, going down the steps 2 at a time and sprinting in the direction of the train station. Shyuda had developed a thick skin over the years, an effect of being insulted most of his life, but there was only so much he was able to tolerate of having his sexuality and masculinity questioned before it started to hurt. Not that he had anything against the LGBTQ community, like his father clearly did, he just had never felt any relation to those titles. He has never been interested in any type relationship. He wasn't interested in girls or boys, though he did admit that he found girls slightly attractive. It was confusing. He wasn't interested in forming romantic or SXL relationships with them, and had no interest in anything that people his age were definitely interested in. He had heard the other boys in his class talking about girls and guys in SXL ways, and had seen them looking upon in the restrooms. The thought of SXL relationships actually gave him anxiety. He had tried thinking of girls and boys in a SXL way, but he never got a reaction and ended up feeling nauseous afterwards. There was nothing wrong with his body. Once he hit PBRY, his body did have the normal reactions like the other boys. Reactions that the school nurse informed all the boys of his grade that were normal and to be expected, and that could be completely random. He woke up many mornings to these normal reactions, or what his classmates called morning wood. And he could get a reaction himself, just like the nurses said all boys could. But he could not react to anyone, male or female. He had glanced at some of the pawn his classmates brought, but he never felt anything when seeing the naked men or women. So he decided that he just wasn't interested in section. And that was fine with him. He also wasn't interested in having friends either. He ignored the little voice deep inside that secretly craved a close friend, and the affection and human contact that came along with it. How could he explain to a friend that they couldn't come over because his parents treated him like shit? He could say that he lived in a bad neighborhood, but what if they persisted? No, being alone was safer. He would just rely on Mrs. Akashi being his only good source of human contact. He didn't need the company of anyone his own age. They were all irrational anyway. That's what Shyuda thought as he made his way to the library. Time skip. Shyuda was a student at UA, and even better, he was finally in the hero course after having proven himself at the sports festival. He had been moved there from general education. That had been a nightmare to explain when he got home. Being in the Gen Ed course, he didn't have to explain away any bruises, not that they would care. Shyuda had been beaten up by classmates before, or have any permission slips signed for training. He could always sign them himself. He had gotten away with putting his address down as his neighbor's. She knew he was keeping being at UA a secret from his family, and didn't question it. She knew they weren't supportive, and Shyuda was good at hiding how awful they treated him from her. He was a very good liar. So any important letters had been sent to her. But the sports festival was broadcast across all TV stations, so imagine his father's surprise at being congratulated at work on his son doing so well. He was almost afraid the cops would be called at the yelling match that had ensued. His father yelling at him to quit and his mother glaring at him from behind his father. Shyuda, losing his temper for once, had yelled back, screaming that if they wanted him to quit being a hero, they would have to kill him first. That death would be preferable to living with them. His mother had lunged forward and slapped him across the face, knocking his head back with the force of the impact and knocking him to the floor. His father had pulled his mother back by her hair and shoved her away. He turned back to Shyuda with the most hate-filled eyes and had told him to go ice his face. They didn't speak to him about UA again. His father probably worried that he would snitch to the heroes about his home life if they persisted. They still treated him awfully, but they were extra careful after that not to leave any marks on him. His jaw had hurt for days. Anyway, before he had taken the entrance exam, Shyuda had done some research and had discovered from the school website that all of the students who had been placed directly in the hero course had physical mutant-type quirks or quirks suited for fighting. Shyuda's quirk was not made of combat, and whatever was in the entrance exam, it was probably something hard to fight. He doubted his quirk would be able to go up against it. So Shyuda had resigned himself to the general education course after having read that it was possible to transfer if he did well at the tournament. And he had definitely done well, having come in third. And that's how he finally found himself in the hero course. He had been in the hero course over a month now, and a very loud blonde boy, who he had beaten during the combat portion of the festival, had pestered him the entire time, doing everything he could think of to force Shyuda into conversation with him. Shyuda ignored him at first and even tried being rude and telling the boy to leave him alone, which the boy had responded with a very drawn-out, nope, popping the P at the end. Not used to having someone put so much effort into befriending him, the walls he had built over the years had crumbled and the boy effectively finger-gunned his way into Shyuda's life. Shyuda couldn't find it in his heart to mind, he'd never had a friend before. And the boy made it clear that they were going to be the bestest friends ever. Shyuda sat at his desk at the back of the classroom and didn't even flinch when a very loud quirk-induced Aizawa was yelled in his direction. Shyuda didn't flinch around people who weren't his parents. He didn't fear others like he feared his parents. He also knew that his reaction to his parents was conditioned and something he couldn't help. He was not going to show that same weakness to others. He might not be able to do anything about that weakness at home, but at school he could be strong and was allowed to be strong. So he never flinched, not when fighting and not when an overenthusiastic cockatoo threw himself on Shyuda's desk, preening and demanding attention as if his life depended on it. Yamada, Shyuda sighed in acknowledgement. Yamada could be a bit overwhelming at times, constantly showing and needing attention and affection. He was like one of those Tamagotchi pets, you forget to feed it one time and it dies. Shyuda was a logical person and knew that his friend wouldn't die from lack of attention or not being allowed to drape himself across Shyuda. He had plenty of other friends, Kayama who was an upperclassman and Ida for example. He didn't need Shyuda's constant attention, but the back of his mind told that he shouldn't risk it. Just in case. It was only logical. Come over to my house this weekend, dude. We'll study, listen to some rad songs, and eat junk food till we barf. Yamada begged, letting his shades slip down his nose, doing his best at making puppy eyes at Shyuda. Shyuda nodded his head yes, as he had been over to Yamada's house once before with Ida. It was a pleasant two-story American-style house. Yamada's mother was American, that explains his blonde hair and green eyes, and his father was Japanese with brown hair and brown eyes. Yamada's father had been studying pediatrics in America while his mother had been studying pharmaceutics. They met at school, fell in love, and got married quickly. They waited until after they graduated and had been working independently for a few years before they decided to have a child. Yamada Hisashi was born in the US and lived there until he was 3, then his father received an invitation to work at a prestigious children's hospital in Japan that catered to deaf and blind patients and hired deaf doctors. So they had taken the offer and had moved. Yamada's mother worked in the pharmacy part of the hospital. They were nice people, and Shyuda couldn't help but wonder what being raised by them must have been like. They were patient with Yamada's dramatics, and seemed to indulge him constantly. Whatever their son showed an interest in, they worked to cultivate it, encouraging him to try new things. So by 15, their son was an amateur DJ, spoke not only English and Japanese but also French and Italian, could play the piano, knew JSL and SL, and was now on his way to being a hero. Yamada really was talented and smart. Both of Yamada's parents were deaf. Shyuda had only found that out and about their lives after he had visited the first time. Apparently their son had been born with his quirk and had damaged his parents' hearing, along with the doctors and nurses. Throughout the years of a young Yamada trying to learn control over his quirk, his parents had gone completely deaf. Not even hearing aids could help them. This was something Yamada felt guilty about, but had come to terms with. All 3 Yamadas were surprised when Shyuda had shown up with Ida the one time that he had visited, and had started signing to them before his friend could even announce that his parents were deaf. Yamada, being the scatterbrain that he is, had forgot to mention it, and Ida had felt that it wasn't his place to tell Shyuda. When he and Ida had shown up at the Yamadas, Ida had offered to show him the way and met him at a location they both were familiar with. The Yamadas were all waiting at the threshold to greet Shyuda and Ida. He had noticed right away the way that they carefully watched everyone's mouth, and the way their voices switched tones at odd places, something that people who can't hear what they are saying do. So without hesitation, Shyuda had introduced himself using sign language. The look on their faces had been priceless. Shyuda sat at his desk, agreeing to weekend study session. It was a good excuse to be away from home. The teacher entered the classroom soon after and ordered Yamada to get his overly social butt in his seat. The class had snickered at that while Yamada pouted. So, Saturday eventually rolled around, and Shyuda found himself in Yamada's bright neon green room with equally bright neon yellow borders. It was a very bright room. Yamada was practically hanging upside down off his bed, reading Heroes Weekly, a stupid gossip magazine about heroes that Shyuda refused to read. Shyuda himself was seated cross-legged on the floor, actually studying. Yamada soon got bored of the magazine, letting it fall to the floor with a thud, rolling over to look at Shyuda. Shyuda only spared him a quick glance before returning to his notes. He knew Yamada couldn't stay quiet for long, and once he was ready to talk he would. "So when can I visit your house?" Yamada asked. He had asked a few times to visit, and Shyuda had shot down each one, giving excuses such as, it's not the safest neighborhood to travel around in if you aren't familiar, or his parents didn't like to have company because they were tired after working all day. And it's small and he would rather hang out somewhere else than be cooped up there. He didn't lie, just omitted the fact that his parents were awful bstrdis. While he knew they wouldn't do or say anything while a guest was around, but once the guest left they would take out their frustrations on him. He also didn't want them to know he had friends, didn't want them to ever meet his friends, because once they did, Shyuda would have to hear all the insults that are usually directed at him aimed at his friends. He didn't want that, didn't know if he could keep himself from lashing out if they did, didn't want to know what they would do if he did lash out. He had considered bringing Yamada to his neighbor's apartment, but decided against it. It was just too dangerous to have Yamada that close to his parents. He also knew that Yamada and Mrs. Akashi would get along like two peas in a pod, and that they would talk about him. Not that he had a problem with that, he just knew that Yamada was smart, and that hearing about his life, Mrs. Akashi couldn't anything too risky about his life because she didn't know, he would figure out that Shyuda spent most of his time with his neighbor. He would fix out that Shyuda never had any friends, and that she was practically raising him, feeding him and mending his clothes. It wouldn't take long before he put two and two together. Shyuda sighed, putting his notes aside, and gave Yamada his best deadpan look. "You know why, Yamada?" His friend sat up with a pout, crossing his arms before leveling Shyuda with his most determined look. "Yeah," he whined. "But I like to know everything about my friends. Where they live so we can hang out or I can send holiday cards. Their number, so I can call and text them dash." Shyuda interrupted his friend quickly. "You talk to me enough already, Yamada. You've talked to me enough to last 3 lifetimes. You also know I don't have a phone because I can't afford one," Shyuda said, setting aside his notebook and watching his friend grow more frustrated. Yamada threw his hands up in the air and let out long quirk-induced whine. "I know. I'm just saying." Yamada complained. "Look, the only things I know about you are your favorite color, food, holiday, season, music, book, how tall you are, and that you like cats and sleeping," his friend declared. Shyuda couldn't stop himself from rolling his eyes. "Isn't that enough?" he asked, leaning back on his hands. "No!" Yamada shouted, using his quirk. Shyuda activated his own quirk, threatening Yamada with it. His friend was still learning how to control his quirk when stressed or excited. Shyuda's quirk seemed to distract his friend for the moment, and when he deactivated his hair fell down to just brush his shoulders. Yamada did a complete 180 and began a rant about his hair. "Dude, your hair is so long. Is your hair thick? It looks like it is it soft? Oh, let me braid it." Yamada gleefully screeched, dashing out of the room and down the hall to his parents' room before Shyuda could even respond. Seconds later, Yamada dashed back into the bedroom with multiple small hairbands and sat expectantly on the side of his bed. Shyuda stared at his friend for a moment before giving in and going over to Yamada and settling back between his legs. Shyuda enjoyed the way his long hair seemed to piss his father off to no end. And now that his father knew he was going to the top hero school, seemed reluctant to do anything more than insult Shyuda about his hair. Which was fine with him, the less he had to worry about the better. Having his hair brushed and braided was oddly relaxing, and Shyuda found himself falling asleep sitting up. A small tug on his hair snapped him awake in an instant and he jolted slightly. "Sorry dude, didn't mean to scare you. It's just if you fall asleep and face plant the floor, I won't be able to finish your hair," Yamada muttered. Shyuda hummed in reply and made sure to keep himself awake. He knew Yamada didn't mean to startle him, and had no way of knowing that his parents had pulled him around by his hair more than once, or that his father pulled it when passing while calling him a pee-pee boy or other unsavory things. He would have to remove the braid before he got home, just to be safe. Once Yamada was done, he launched to his feet, pulling Shyuda up too, and practically dragging Shyuda to the bathroom to show him his hard work. Shyuda was impressed. Yamada had done a good job with the French braid. It wasn't long, ending halfway down his neck, but his hair only reached his shoulders, so that was understandable. Shyuda nodded his approval. Before making his way back to the bedroom to finish his studying, the braid would do a good job at keeping his hair out of his face. Maybe he should let Yamada do this before training at school. It would keep his hair out of his eyes, and would also mean that when he activated his quirk, no one would be able to tell. Shyuda had requisition goggles with his hero costume to prevent people from telling who he was looking at, and so they couldn't see the red of his eyes when his quirk was active. Yamada seemed happy that Shyuda approved of his handy work. It probably wouldn't be so bad to let Yamada fix his hair every now and then. When he told him this, a wicked smile crept onto his face, and Shyuda had the distinct feeling of being a mouse about to be eaten by a vicious cat. "Dude, Kiyama and I are gonna do your hair every day. She knows way more styles than I do. You're so screwed." Yamada laughed wickedly. Yamada sobered up quickly. Shyuda was amazed at how quickly his friend's mood could change. "You're not giving me the cold shoulder on visiting you because you find me too annoying? Are you?" his friend asked quietly. Yamada was sitting on the floor in front of his bed now, looking down at his lap. Shyuda sighed. This line of thought he could deal with, though he was surprised that his friend felt such insecurity. He practically oozed confidence, but maybe that was just a facade. "You are annoying," Shyuda admitted, grinning widely at the boy in front of him to show he was teasing. Shyuda rarely smiled, and found that he really sucked at it. But it made his friends laugh, so kept doing it. And it worked its magic now, causing Yamada to burst into a loud giggling fit. One of the perks it seemed to having deaf parents was that Yamada didn't have to watch his volume, and could be almost as loud as he wanted, though he did have to consider the neighbors. After he was finished laughing and could talk normally, he was back to being serious. "You sure I can't come over?" he asked, watching Shyuda intently. "I'm sure," Shyuda told him again. Yamada nodded, and they went back to studying, with Yamada occasionally stopping to show Shyuda something on his phone. Shyuda stayed a few more hours before leaving to head home. He made sure to undo the braid before he reached his apartment. It had been 4 weeks since Shyuda had visited Yamada at home, and true to his word, he and Kiyama braided Shyuda's hair almost every other. It would have been every day, but a teacher wisely pointed out that pulling his hair back so much would make him go bald prematurely, so they had agreed to braid his hair every few days. They didn't braid his hair every time they had hero training because Shyuda decided he needed to learn how to fight with it down. They were doing combat training, and Shyuda had his hair pulled back in a French braid, the only braid Yamada knew. He was facing one of the students from Class 1B. She had a mutant-type quirk. Her skin was as thick and tough as an elephant's skin, without the wrinkles, and brilliant brown with just a tinge of red to it. Shyuda felt it was nice color and suited her perfectly, and it was matched by bright curly red hair and eyes as black as night. She was also very tall, around 6 feet. She reminded Shyuda of an Amazon warrior princess, and he was absolutely intimidated by her. Their fight was short-lived. Shyuda tried his best to use his speed and short height to make up for the fact that she was way stronger than him, but she had been training longer than he had. She kept landing punch after punch despite his best efforts at avoiding her blows. But one roundhouse kick to his head knocked him out of the fight and out in general. The medical robots had to cart his unconscious body to the infirmary, where one kiss later, Shyuda was healed. He slept the rest of the class away. Thankfully it was the last of the day, and when he finally woke up, Recovery Girl sent him home. His friends, Yamada, Koyama and Ida, were waiting for him by the entrance gate. They offered to walk home with him, or at least halfway there, but Shyuda waved them away. He could make it home on his own just fine, as long as he didn't fall asleep while walking. Once home, he sleepily made his way to his room. A side effect of Recovery Girl's healing was that he was absolutely exhausted. He was almost to his room when he heard his father roar. "What the F is that on your head?" Shyuda spun around to face his father, who was storming over to him from the living room where he had been seated with his mother, she who looked visibly pale and was staring at him with wide eyes. Shyuda lifted his hand to his head and felt the braids still in place. He had forgotten to undo it, too tired and sore to give it much thought, despite it becoming a habit to do before he reached home. Shyuda didn't even have time to run or curse himself for his stupidity before his father had reached him, ripping the hairbands out along with some of his hair. Shyuda cried out as his father dug his fingers into Shyuda's hair, getting a firm grip, and started to drag Shyuda to the bathroom. Shyuda tried to get free, but the hold on his hair was too strong and his father was walking too fast. He tried hitting him, but his fist barely grazed his father. The man's reach being longer than his own made it easier to hold Shyuda at a distance. Shyuda slipped and fell, but his father kept going, dragging him the rest of the way to the bathroom by his hair. He hauled Shyuda up onto his feet by his hair, all while Shyuda clawed at him and yelled to be let go. He tried ramming his elbow into his father's side, his fight instinct taking over after all the months of training at school. His father grunted in pain, but didn't stop. He rammed Shyuda forward into the sink, his stomach colliding painfully with the hard tile and the top of his head knocking the faucet. 2 head injuries in one day. It hurt. The tile pressed into his stomach and his head throbbed. His father's firm grip in his hair hurt. His mother standing in the doorway doing nothing hurt. It all hurt. "Effing let go of me!" Shyuda screamed. He didn't care if the neighbors heard. He knew they wouldn't do anything to help. His father harshly pressed his face deeper into the bowl of the sink before cutting on the faucet. Shyuda sputtered as water poured over his mouth and nose, effectively shutting him up. Shyuda thought he would drown, but once all his hair was soaked, his father cut the water off. Shyuda gasped in a deep breath. He had feared for a moment that his father was actually trying to drown him. His father yanked one of the drawers under the sink open, pulling out a pair of scissors that he used to trim his hair. Shyuda began to struggle harder, even though he knew it was pointless. He wasn't in a good position to fight back anymore. His face was practically pressed to the bottom of the sink, leaned so far over that his feet were no longer touching the floor. He tried to kick out a few times, but his father only moved so that one of his legs was pinned between both of Shyuda's. Ensuring any more kicking attempts would be futile. He held the scissors as close to Shyuda's scalp as he could with him struggling and began to cut. With every cut, Shyuda sobbed. Strands falling in pools around his face, sticking to his tears and getting in his mouth, almost choking him. His father insulted him. Single. Cut. Calling him a fgot. Threatening to cut off his PP if he wanted to be a girl so badly. When his hair kept getting shorter, his father moved his hand from Shyuda's hair to his neck, using his neck to keep holding him down in the sink. Nearly an hour later, his hair was thick after all. The cutting finally stopped. Shyuda's sobs had stopped halfway through the brutal cutting of his hair and had just laid across the sink limply. He just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. His father stepped back satisfied with his work, and Shyuda sunk to the cold tile floor and curled up on himself. His father pushed past his mother and wandered off somewhere in the apartment. Shyuda didn't care where, he was just glad his father was away from him. His mother looked at him a moment before sighing too, leaving him to wallow on the floor after telling him to clean the mess up. Shyuda stayed on the floor for a few minutes before deciding to stand up and assess the damage. He looked in the mirror and wanted to throw up. His hair, which had been just past his shoulders, was now cropped nearly an inch from his scalp. A sob ripped its way out of his throat. What would he tell his friends? His friends? They couldn't braid his hair anymore. Would they be angry with him? He knew they wouldn't. But what would he tell them? What would they believe? What would Yamada believe? He was too smart to believe any of the excuses Shyuda was running through his head. And with how poorly the cut was, he was going to have to take the clippers and buzz the rest of the hair. The tears started to run down his face again. He complained that his long hair was a disadvantage while fighting for many reasons, but he had really liked his long hair and how his friends had enjoyed playing with it. He enjoyed the contact and didn't mind some of the silly things they had put his hair through. They were having fun, and that made him happy. And now it was all over. He sunk back to the ground and buried his face in his arms. He really should have been worried about what his father had been doing, but he was too tired and too distraught. So he was unaware of his father walking quietly behind him with a belt held tightly in his hand, while Shyuda sat on the bathroom floor thinking that his punishment was over. Shyuda was pushed roughly face first onto the bathroom floor, a knee pressed between his shoulder blades to hold him down. I'm gonna beat that pee-pee boy attitude right out of you. No son of mine is going to be a fag. His father growled. Drawing his arm up over his head, in one quick and fluid motion his father brought the belt down across his backside. And he repeated the motion. And again. And again. Shyuda was losing count on how many times his father hit him. He had never been whipped before, never had been punished so harshly. He could do nothing more than cry out. His voice was rough from his previous crying and it was slowly losing volume. Every time he struggled the belt was brought down harder, so Shyuda laid there and waited for it to end. He could see black spots dancing across his vision, and worried briefly if he was going to pass out. With the only neighbor who would help him being unable to hear his cries, and the others not caring or not wanting to get involved for whatever reasons, Shyuda knew that no one was going to be coming to rescue him. No one would call the police for him. No hero was going to swoop in and save the day. He was on his own. There was also no way I'm going to be able to sit down anytime soon after this. Finally, with one last whip, his father got up and left him alone for good. His mother never came back to check on him. He didn't know if she watched like she had done with his hair, but he knew she wasn't there for him now. She wasn't there to help him off the floor and to his room, and he shouldn't have expected her to be. He was on his own. She hadn't tried to protect him from his father in years, opting to keep herself safe. Honestly, she had become just as bad at doing things to make Shyuda's life miserable. He was just missing the memory of how she used to be. Shyuda picked himself up. It took a few tries as his legs kept giving out on him, and he would wind up back on the floor on his hands and knees. But once he was standing and was sure he wouldn't collapse, he made his way out of the bathroom. His father and mother were nowhere to be seen, probably asleep in their room. Which was good, he needed some privacy right now. He made his way to his room. Glancing in the living room, he noticed all the beer bottles that littered the coffee table that weren't there that morning. Well, that explains that, he thought to himself. In his room, he grabbed a change of clothes and walked back out. He picked his school bag up off the floor by his bedroom door, where he had dropped it when the whole nightmare began, and stuffed his clothes in it. Slinging it over his shoulder, he walked to the doorway and slipped his shoes back on before quietly walking out the apartment. It was a long and painful journey to the Yamada house. Shyuda had to take the train to get their home, and he hadn't sat down the whole time. He knew he wouldn't be able to get back up if he did, so he spent the entire 35-minute ride standing. Shyuda thought he would throw up a few times from the pain. At least he didn't feel like he was going to pass out again. He had finally made it to Yamada's home, and he was sure it was close to the middle of the night by now, and that his friend was probably asleep. Shyuda needed his friend though. He needed someone to turn to, someone his parents didn't know and couldn't find. So with the little strength he had left, he pounded his fist against the door repeatedly. He knew from Yamada that the doorbell triggered the lights in the house to flash, and Shyuda wanted to avoid his friend's parents for as long as he could. Shyuda heard his friend's quirk-induced voice yell from inside the house, announcing that he heard him, threatening that if this wasn't important, then whoever was outside was fixing to get their eardrums bust wide open. The door was thrown open to reveal a very bedraggled Yamada with his hair down and sticking out in some places. Hisashi was wearing a faded band shirt and plaid pajama bottoms. His glasses sat crookedly on his nose. His friend stared at him for a minute before screeching in horror, "Shoo!" Shyuda would have been shocked at Yamada using his given name for the first time, but he was too tired and emotionally drained. Before he could say anything, his friend grabbed him and pulled him inside, slamming the door behind them. He pulled Shyuda carefully along to the living room to a long gray sectional and ordered him to sit down. Shyuda shook his head and rubbed the back of his neck, wincing at the loss of hair that usually covered his neck. I don't think I can sit down, Yamada. Hizashi. It felt weird saying his friend's given name, but it felt rude not to after his had been used. He saw a look of utter horror cross Yamahizashi's face. Remembering that Hizashi had recently come out as by SXL, he realized that his friend was jumping to the worst conclusion. That Shyuda had been raped. Shyuda hurried to ease his friend's fear, at least as much as he could. No. Hizashi, no. I was whipped earlier, so I think it will hurt too bad to sit down. That's all. Hizashi still stared at him in horror, his face paling at what Shyuda had told him. Hizashi swallowed, he had tears pouring down his face and he was trembling. That's all. That's all. You were effing whipped. What were you whipped with? But why the hell were you whipped? Why would anyone even whip you? He scared Shyuda. What's going on? Hizashi cried, quirk activating at random. Shyuda flinched at the loudness and looked down at his feet, unwilling to meet Hizashi's gaze. A belt. Shyuda mumbled. My father beat me with a belt after he cut off all my hair. Shyuda choked out. All because I had my hair in effing braid. I usually undo it before I get home. My long hair made him mad enough already. But today I was just so tired that I forgot. He had been drinking and when he saw my hair, and he just snapped. Hizashi pulled Shyuda into a hug, wrapping his arms around him and cried into Shyuda's shoulder. Shyuda cried too, burying his face in his friend's chest and holding on to his shirt. Hizashi had hit a growth spurt and was taller than him now. They stayed like that before Hizashi let go. You need to lie down, and I'll go wake my parents. My dad will need to check your injuries and you know we have to call the police, right? But that can wait until he checks you over and you tell them what happened. What's been happening? Don't lie and say it's the first time they've hurt you. I can effing tell when you're lying. Shyuda nodded his head. He knew this would happen when he came here. But he was surprised that Hizashi could tell when he was lying. That's probably why he constantly tried to find out why he wasn't allowed over to Shyuda's. Seeing through Shyuda's half-truths and worrying for his friend. Hizashi helped him lay down on his stomach on the couch. Frown worsening with every wince Shyuda made. Once he was sure Shyuda was as comfortable as he could get, he dashed out of the living room and up the stairs. Shyuda tilted his head to the side to watch the stairs. It wasn't long before Shyuda heard multiple feet pounding down the stairs, and Mr. Yamada came sliding into view. The couch faced the wall that the stairs was hidden behind. Mr. Yamada quite literally slid into the living room, his socked feet having little traction on the hardwood floor. He came to a stop once he saw Shyuda, looking relieved that he didn't have a dying boy on his couch. What did Hizashi tell them? The boy in question plowed into his father moments after he had stopped, followed by Mrs. Yamada, who plowed into her son. Shyuda snorted at the three Yamada pile up. That seemed to snap Mr. Yamada out of his daze, who quickly but carefully made his way over to Shyuda. He crouched down in front of Shyuda and tentatively brushed his fingers over what was left of his hair. Shyuda had to repress a sob. Mr. Yamada scooted away some so that Shyuda could see his hands and began to sign. Shyuda, I need you to tell me what happened to you. All Hizashi could tell us was that your father was a BSRD and that you're lucky to be alive. That's why Mr. Yamada had been so freaked out. Shyuda glanced over at Hizashi. He had his face buried in his mother's shoulder and was sobbing as quietly as somebody with a voice quirk could. Shyuda didn't feel like talking, his throat hurt and he was just too tired to actually talk. So he rolled over onto his side so that he could put his hands in front of himself for Mr. Yamada to see. He tried his best not to wince or make too many pain sounds, but by the look on the man's face he had failed. Signing, Shyuda responded. My parents can be very verbally abusive and sometimes physically. Never anything bad enough to leave a lasting mark. My father is very homophobic, and me having long hair has always made him mad. He calls me a pee-pee boy, among other things. Today when I came home from school I was tired from getting knocked out in a fight, and forgot to undo the braid my hair had been put in. Mr. Yamada motions for him to continue when Shyuda had paused. My father had been drinking heavily, and when he saw my hair he snapped. He ripped my hair out of the braid and dragged me to the bathroom. I had fallen and he just kept dragging me. Forced me to hang over the sink, knocking my head against the faucet hard, then he cut all my hair off. I tried to fight back to get free, but I wasn't in any position to do so and too weak from having a concussion healed. I've never tried fighting back before, too scared of what he would do, and the one time I try I fail. Shyuda was crying again but continued anyway. After he cut my hair he left me in the bathroom. My mom had watched but didn't stop him. Shouldn't be surprised. She had almost as physically violent as him. I was too busy crying, wasn't paying attention, I didn't hear him come back. He forced me to the floor and held me down with his knee while he whipped me with a belt. I thought I was going to pass out. Once he finished he left me alone for good. I think they both went to bed after that. I came here because I didn't want to put my deaf elderly neighbor in danger and because they don't know I have friends now. Once Shyuda had finished he pulled his hands to his chest and closed his eyes. He wasn't crying anymore, it hurt too much to cry. He was tired of crying, it didn't solve anything. His eyes shot open as his head was lifted and placed in a warm lap. Looking up, he saw Mrs. Yamada. She was openly crying and started to gently rub her thumb across his cheek. Mr. Yamada had gotten up and had left the room. Hizashi was standing by the stairs, he looked angry and determined. All the Yamadas were horrified at what they had been told. Were horrified that Shyuda had made his own way all the way to their home in the dead of night. While in so much pain, Shyuda was glad Hizashi didn't know where he lived. He was worried his friend would march to his house and scream at his parents until they lost their minds or died. It wasn't long before Mr. Yamada returned, carrying a first aid kit. He faced Yamada and mouthed something to Hizashi, who left and returned upstairs. Shyuda didn't want his friend to leave, but assumed Mr. Yamada had a good reason for sending him away. He walked over to Shyuda and stood in front of him, handing Mrs. Yamada the first aid kit. Once his hands were free, he signed to Shyuda. I need to check your injuries, and my wife will act as a witness. I know it's awkward, but you're going to have to remove your clothes. Shyuda was extremely embarrassed. Undressing in front of Mr. Yamada was one thing. He was a man, but Mrs. Yamada? He knew he had to do this, it was the logical course of action. Mr. Yamada was a doctor for all, even if it was just for kids. But if this got him out of having to actually go to a hospital, then he would do it. This is why he sent Hizashi away. They didn't want Hizashi to see any injuries that Shyuda might have. Did the fact that it was logical to get checked over to see if he needed to be rushed to the hospital make it less embarrassing? Nope. Was Shyuda going to do it anyway? Yep. With the help of Mr. Yamada, Shyuda stripped his school uniform and underwear off. It was humiliating to be standing in the Yamada's living room, naked as the day he was born, with almost the same amount of hair as then. Mrs. Yamada politely looked away, just filling the role that a nurse usually fulfills while a doctor examines a patient. She's just there as an observer who doesn't actually have to observe, just a presence supposed to keep the doctor and patient at ease. Mr. Yamada takes note of the bruise on Shyuda's stomach, poking to access the swelling, seemingly satisfied that Shyuda probably doesn't have any internal injuries, just bruising. He pressed the top of Shyuda's head, where his head had hit the faucet. Shyuda winced at the pain and Mr. Yamada looked at him with sympathy. He left Shyuda's head alone and signed, "There is some swelling. You'll have a nice knot on your head. But I don't think you have another concussion." He slowly spun Shyuda around so that his back is facing him, and takes in a sharp breath. Shyuda can't see for himself, but he's sure it's not a pretty picture. Which is a shame, because Shyuda had been told by Kiyama that he had a perfectly round butt. He knew his father was beating him with as much force as he could, but he didn't think it would actually cause much damage through his clothes other than bruising. Mr. Yamada must have signed something to his wife, because she starts rummaging around in the first aid kit. Finding what she needs, she passes them over to her husband. Shyuda is just starting to wonder what he's doing, when he feels the first sting. Shyuda curses loudly, glad that the Yamadas that are present are deaf and not looking at his mouth. Hey, that hurt. I must have a cut or two. Shyuda winces again as the cotton ball soaked in rubbing alcohol is pressed to another cut. Finally the torture is over and Mr. Yamada stands up. He had been crouched down while tending to Shyuda's backside, a fact that mortified Shyuda. He paused Mr. Yamada's signing to his wife to get the man's attention, informing him that he had grabbed a change of clothes before he came over. Mr. Yamada nodded and left to fetch his clothes from the front door where he had left his bag. Mrs. Yamada had wandered over to the stairs and was signing. Hisashi must have been sitting on the stairs the whole time. She slowly signed to her son, "He'll be all right, sweetie. Your dad made sure to check over him well, although he'll still have to make a trip to the hospital later for an official checkup." Shyuda frowned at that. He really didn't want more people looking at him naked. He has lots of bruises and some minor cuts on his bottom. She continued, "Bottom? Really? He's just mainly very sore and probably very tired. But he'll recover quickly, although it might take a few days before he can sit down." Mr. Yamada had returned with his clothes and helped Shyuda get dressed in a loose shirt and sweatpants. Seeing that he was dressed, Mrs. Yamada motioned for her son that he could come down. Mr. Yamada helped Shyuda lay back down on the couch on his stomach, and Hisashi dashed across the room to his side. Hisashi knelt in front of the couch and sobbed in Shyuda's face. "Shyuda," he wailed. "You should have told me." Mrs. Yamada returned to her position as Shyuda's personal pillow, rubbing his head with her hand. Shyuda sighed, trying his best to stay awake. "I thought I could handle it until I turned 18. It's never been that bad before." Hisashi's father had walked back upstairs, but returned to see Shyuda say that. He frowned, taping Hisashi on the shoulder and handing him a silver flip phone. Looking at Shyuda he signed, "Even if it wasn't that bad before, you shouldn't have had to go through that. You should have told someone, but I can understand that having gone through that your whole life, you probably didn't think to tell anyone because it's something that has always been done. Children get conditioned to stay quiet, and clearly you were conditioned. You probably don't really see yourself as an abuse victim, seeing your situation as mild." Mr. Yamada asked. Shyuda nodded his head and Mr. Yamada sighed. He looked like he wanted to say more but changed his mind. Getting Hisashi's attention, he signed for him to call the police, seeing as he was the only one aside from Shyuda who could hear. And Shyuda clearly needed a break. Hisashi nodded and dialed the police. He was clearly nervous about the responsibility, but dutifully informed the police of the situation. Shyuda had fallen asleep before Hisashi had gotten off the phone with the police, and it felt all too soon before he was being nudged awake by Mrs. Yamada. An officer with a cat for a head and a plain-looking man in a trench coat and hat stood in front of him. The officer in the trench coat addressed him. "Hello, Aizawa. I'm Officer Tsukachi, and this is Officer Sansa. We have a few questions for you, and would appreciate your cooperation." Shyuda nodded, but made no move to sit up. He was tired and he could talk to them laying down just as well as he could sitting up, and he didn't think he was going to be able to sit up anytime soon. Tsukachi gave him a small smile before continuing, clearly not bothered by Shyuda staying lying down. Hisashi was sitting by his feet, and gave his ankle a comforting squeeze. He could sense Mr. Yamada's presence behind the couch. Officer Tsukachi asked him all manner of questions. Where he lived, his parents' names, what had happened when he returned home from school, about his father calling him a pee-pee boy. Apparently Tsukachi took discrimination about sexuality very seriously and only nodded in understanding when Shyuda admitted that he didn't feel any desires or need for romantic relationships. He had Shyuda recount as much of the insults and abuse as he could remember. The Yamadas were clearly horrified by what Shyuda admitted to being called. It was something they all feared Hisashi would have to face one day. Hisashi was crying his eyes out and he could understand why. Hisashi was an emotional person, but Mr. and Mrs. Yamada's tears confused him. He had only met them twice before and couldn't understand why they were crying for him, but he guesses it didn't really matter. If they wanted to cry for him, that was fine. Shyuda was done crying and hoped he never cried again. Finished with their questions, the officers had the Yamadas drive Shyuda to the hospital while they followed along. He needed an official checkup, and pictures of the damage needed to be taken, to Shyuda's horror. He didn't protest or fight it, just went along with it, ready for the whole ordeal to be over with so that he could go back to sleep. It was 3:34 in the morning when they made it back to the Yamadas. Everyone was visibly tired and ready to sleep the pain away. Tsukachi had sent a pair of officers to his home while they were still at the hospital and informed Shyuda that they were going to be brought in where he could question them. Before they had parted ways, Tsukachi had leaned over to Shyuda and whispered, "And just so you know, my quirk is lie detector, your parents are screwed." He had left a madly grinning Shyuda with two very confused Yamadas and one that knew the smile meant something good. Or at least Shyuda's version of good. Back at the Yamada house, Hisashi nearly carried him upstairs to his room and to his own bed. Hisashi was still feeling anxious and didn't want Shyuda to be left alone in the guest bedroom. They both promptly fell asleep as soon as their heads hit the pillows. Things happened quickly after that. His parents were arrested and charged with multiple instances of child abuse. His father received 25 years in prison while his mother got 15. Hisashi really wanted Shyuda to live with him and be his brother, but when Shyuda told him that his neighbor, the one who had practically raised him, wanted Shyuda to live with her, Hisashi relented. But promised to visit him every weekend, and that Shyuda had to visit him at least 3 times during the week. Shyuda would still see Hisashi every day at school, but the boy had become possessive of him and declared himself, Kayama and Ida as the Shyuda protection squad. He supported and encouraged Shyuda's therapy, going with him and sitting in the waiting room, even if it was for hours some days. All his friends bought him beanie hats to wear until his hair grew out to a length he was happy with. Hisashi would patiently prod Shyuda to talk about how he felt, not wanting him to suppress his emotions. Always willing to listen, never interrupting or telling him his feelings were wrong, or telling him he was a victim. Shyuda didn't want to be called a victim, or expecting him to have a breakdown. Shyuda was very good at holding himself together and rarely fell apart. Sometimes Hisashi was more helpful than his actual therapist. He never got angry when Shyuda told him that he only felt anger about his situation. He didn't feel sad for himself. He was just sad. He didn't judge Shyuda when he said that he had mainly cried that night because he had lost his hair. He had cried from the pain and shock of being whipped. From feeling weak, and because Hisashi had cried. Hisashi never gave his opinion on anything, except for his opinion on Shyuda's parents. He was just there for Shyuda when he needed him. His abuse had been something that had gone on for so long it had become just a part of his life that he had accepted, and now that it was over, it was just over. Shyuda had always prided himself over his ability to adapt, and this was just something he had to adapt to. He did have moments where at school when they were training and he found himself pinned down, he would panic a little, but he was always quick to cool his panic and think logically. He worked twice as hard until none of his classmates could pin him. Unfortunately, and to Shyuda's shock, he couldn't stomach having his hair in a braid anymore. It made him feel physically sick. So his friends settled for elaborate buns, or buying cat hairbands to pull his hair into ponytails. He still enjoyed the feeling of their hands in his hair though. He knew they wouldn't hurt him. Hisashi was a constant in his life throughout high school, a brother in every way but blood. Filling Shyuda's silence with his never-ending chatter, and remaining silent when Shyuda did have something to say. He endlessly teased Shyuda and pulled him to every social gathering their friends had. Shyuda had eventually become Hisashi's voice of reason, because as Namuri put it, Hisashi has no chill. Hisashi eventually became Zashi, and Shyuda became Sho. Sometimes people forgot that Shyuda wasn't the Yamada's emo son, and that he wasn't even related to them. Shyuda kept his surname. He would not let his name be a symbol of fear for him. He would make the name Aizawa something meaningful. It wouldn't be a name full of nothing but hate and abuse. Shyuda would make it something strong and caring. 4 years after graduation, Hisashi stood by Shyuda's side at Mrs. Akashi Miname's funeral. Hisashi and his parents had held Shyuda afterwards on the couch of their home while he cried for the first time in years. He had patched up Shyuda after many patrols where Shyuda hadn't been fast enough to evade injury, and Shyuda did the same for Hisashi, even though those times were less frequent. They had applied to teaching positions at UA at the same time. Shyuda dragging Hisashi into the career after Kayama had put in a recommendation for Shyuda. Hisashi laughed every time Shyuda expelled the majority of his students. Calling him a grumpy hobo caterpillar, Hisashi and Nemuri had bought his sleeping bag as a joke after finding him asleep on the uncomfortable couch in the teacher's lounge. Teaching and night patrols were exhausting and he never needed a real reason to nap. They had not expected him to actually use the monstrosity. They clearly had underestimated him and his willingness to go along with nearly anything. Hisashi listened to him complain about his reckless students. Was there to carry him to safety after the USJ, took care of him as he healed, and lectured him about returning to work too soon after. Made him help announce at the sports festival. Was there for him after the attack on the training camp. Watched with him as the #1 hero lost his power and retired. Listened to his complainants about dorm life. Cried to Shyuda when Sir Night Eye died, didn't judge him when he didn't cry. Understood when he finally cried over his student losing his power and possibly his promising future as a hero. Supported him in fostering Eri, helping to ease her into a normal lifestyle, and absolutely spoiling her. And now he would help him with the mess that is Midoriya Izuku. And he would absolutely be there to listen to Izuku, just like he always is for Shyuda. By the time Shyuda was done telling Izuku his past, the boy was crying hard. He had curled himself under Shuda's arm and had a death grip around Shuda's waist, clinging to Shyuda as if he could squeeze the pain and suffering of Shuda's past out of him. Shyuda was letting him try as he pat Izuku's back awkwardly. Izuku's position at his side was making it difficult to do, but Shyuda didn't give up. His story had taken less than an hour to tell, but to Shyuda it felt like a lifetime. Years of hurtful words and hurtful hands, from the people who were supposed to love and protect him. Shuda's past wasn't something he told just anybody. Not even Nemuri or Tensei knew the extent of his abuse. Just the Yamadas. His past was something he tried to avoid thinking about. But he felt that Izuku needed to know that he wasn't weak for being abused by his childhood friend for years. Having someone who was supposed to be on your side turn against you didn't make you weak, it made them weak. Shyuda was far from weak, had learned that his abuse didn't make him weak, and he would make sure Izuku knew he wasn't either. Izuku was strong, and he would not let the boy think otherwise. Shyuda had seen Izuku second-guess himself many times in class at the beginning of the year, had been hesitant to raise his hand or speak up. His friends had brought him out of his shell and lifted his confidence in himself. They encouraged him and trusted his judgment, and that had done wonders for his self-esteem. He began raising his hand more often in class, speaking with confidence, and not being daunted when he got something wrong. Shaking it off, and trying better next time. Shyuda would deny that he had felt a fondness in his heart at the positive growth Izuku had made. Shyuda had a soft spot for shy and awkward students. Sue him. It's not like he was going to play favorites. He was harsh with everyone. But to know his lack of self-confidence came from the actions of a fellow classmate angered Shyuda. It also set him off how he had missed the signs that it was anything more than just the two boys butting heads. He had seen Bakugu's aggression towards Izuku, had seen Izuku's bright personality dim around the boy. Had watched him flinch at Bakugu's explosions and explosive attitude. But Izuku had flinched at everyone. Any time another student got close to him or spoke to him, he became nervous. Flinching as if he expected to be hit. He knew the boy had to have been bullied to react that way, and even being nervous around the teachers. As if he didn't trust them. He could understand being nervous around Shyuda himself. Shuda's personality and appearance didn't exactly scream friendly. But Shyuda had seen Izuku flinch when Present Mike had tried to throw his arm around the boy's shoulder one day while conversing with him while walking down the hall. Mike, not being as dense as everyone thinks, pulled his arm away casually without breaking conversation. He had whined to Shyuda about how bad it made him feel that he had made the green bean uncomfortable and had made it his goal to get Izuku to trust him. So that's why Shyuda wasn't entirely sure if it was just Bakugu personally that made him that way, or if he responded like that to everyone and just freaked out more toward Bakugu because of the blonde's volatile nature. He just wasn't sure. He was going to keep observing Izuku to try and find out more, but then the greenette became more confident. Grew a backbone and started standing up for himself. He was more self-assured, didn't flinch as often. So Shyuda put it to the back of his mind, where it was forgotten in favor of more pressing matters. He should have looked into their pasts anyway. Izuku had been failed by those around him, and Shyuda couldn't help but add himself to that list. After hearing Izuku's story, Shyuda was shocked that the kid had the ability to trust anyone after being let down so many times by those around him. Shyuda wanted Izuku to trust him, to feel safe in telling Shyuda his secrets, safe enough to reveal what he was holding back. That's why he told Izuku his story, and to put them both on even ground. A story for a story. They both had been hurt by people they cared about, let down and forced to fight for themselves and their dreams. They could relate to each other. Izuku mumbled something against his side, startling Shyuda from his thoughts. "Speak up, problem child, I don't speak mumble." Shyuda laughed, ruffling Izuku's soft curls. Izuku lifted his face from Shyuda's side. Shyuda was starting to feel like a mother monkey with her baby on her back as much as Izuku had been clinging to him. "I said," Izuku repeated between hiccups. Have you seen your parents since then?" "Why do you want to know?" Shyuda asked. He could have just given Izuku a straight answer, but he didn't feel like doing that. Something in him told him to press for a reason. When I first got into UA, I had hoped that I wouldn't be in a class with Kaken. I don't mind anymore, but if I hadn't been forced to be around him, I probably would have avoided him as much as possible. So I was just curious if you had confronted your parents." Izuku admitted. It felt like Izuku was telling him the truth, or at least partial truth. Maybe he should call Tsukachi after all. It's annoying having Izuku dance around, dangling whatever secret he's hiding just out of Shuda's reach. Shyuda sighed and rubbed his hand that wasn't resting on Izuku's head across his face. No point in not answering the boy, and maybe the more Izuku starts to trust him, the closer he will get to the unfiltered truth. "No. I haven't seen them. I never saw the point in confronting them because that would mean that I held some sort of expectations. Be it wanting them to apologize and see their errors, or try and mend our relationship, I just didn't think it was necessary. I didn't want or need to fix things between us. I was better off without them. I didn't want to risk them trying to hurt or control me again." He felt Izuku tense at his side for a moment. It was brief and Shyuda had no idea what triggered it. He replayed what he had just said in his mind, and anything he said could have bothered the boy. Izuku sniffled and mumbled, "I didn't confront Kaken either, not really." Shyuda hummed and moved his hand from Izuku's head as the boy sat up. He twisted his hands together in his lap for a minute before he continued. "We hashed some things out in our fight, but we never addressed the root of our problems. We both just seem to want to forget it all, even though it keeps me up at night sometimes." Izuku said, "I know we will have to talk about it one day. I just don't want to hear him say he doesn't regret it, even though I know he does to some extent." Shyuda knew what Izuku meant. There was a time, a few years after his parents' incarcerations, that he had been afraid of ever seeing them again. Not because of what they could do to him, he had vowed to himself to never let them lay a hand on him again. No, he was afraid that they would show no remorse in making his life miserable. He didn't want to have them confirm that he had meant so little to them. That is why he still has never sought them out, why he doesn't even want an apology from them, fearing it would all be pointless or meaningless. 15 years later, he doesn't need an apology anymore or their love, but still hates the thought that they might not be sorry. It would hurt if they weren't, but he had long since stopped loving his parents. He was an MCST, he didn't want to face them and potential hurt, so the logical conclusion was to cut them out of his life and never look back. 15 years later, his mother is probably getting out of prison soon. Izuku was far more emotional than Shyuda ever was or ever will be. He obviously cared about Bakugu, and if Bakugu told Izuku that he didn't regret the things he had done, Izuku would be devastated. Shyuda doubted Bakugu would say that, but it worried Izuku. "Don't worry, Izuku," Shyuda said, patting the kid on the back. "He regrets it. And if he doesn't, he will soon," Shyuda thought to himself. Shyuda slowly got up and made his way to his bedroom to grab his sleeping bag and lazily made his way back into the living room. He dropped his sleeping bag in front of the coffee table and turned to the TV after picking up the remote. He logged onto Netflix and set a movie marathon of classic Disney movies to play. He figured that he had made Izuku suffer enough today from having the kid spill his tragic past then by telling the green bean his own tragic backstory. Time for a well-deserved break for both of us. Hizashi can shower the kid in love and affection when he gets here. He stepped into his sleeping bag, pulling it all the way on before he turned to Izuku. So, I'm completely emotionally drained and I'm sure you are too. I don't want to talk about myself anymore, you probably don't want to talk about yourself either. Izuku nodded his head in agreement at that. So, movies and naps until Mike gets here after school. Izuku nodded his head again. Good. Shyuda said, then he let his legs fall from under him and flopped backwards loudly to the floor. As soon as he hit the ground he heard a loud, "Holy shit," from Izuku, who jumped up to peer over the table to see if his teacher had knocked himself unconscious. It wouldn't be the first time that Shyuda had miscalculated a flop and hurt himself. Or the first time he had knocked himself out to avoid dealing with something. Shyuda snorted. Kid, I got this sleeping bag custom made to be thick enough just so I can drop to the ground without breaking anything. Shyuda chuckled. When after Izuku had retreated back to the couch, he heard a softer, "Holy shit." Shyuda slept on and off while Izuku watched the marathon, sometimes softly singing along to the songs. He had hoped the boy would sleep too, but Izuku apparently didn't share his ability to sleep anywhere at any given time with 0 FS given. Maybe Izuku would get a decent night's sleep tonight after Hizashi left. They only had a few hours until school let out, and Shyuda knew his friend would rush through all of his paperwork or put it off altogether, just to be here for Izuku. Just a few more hours and Hizashi could work his magic.